Pain was the first thing Kazuki registered, a dull, throbbing ache that seemed to radiate from every joint. He tried to move, and a sharper sting shot through his ribs, making him gasp. His eyes fluttered open to darkness, but not complete blackness. Faint greenish light filtered from somewhere above, illuminating the damp walls of what appeared to be a cave. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, decaying leaves, and something metallic, like old blood. He lay on a bed of moss that felt cool and slightly slimy against his skin. His clothes were unfamiliar, rough spun trousers and a tunic that smelled of wood smoke and sweat. Panic began to bubble in his chest. This wasn't his apartment. This wasn't anywhere he remembered. The last thing he could recall was a blinding light, a sensation of falling, and then, nothing. As he pushed himself up on trembling arms, something shimmered at the edge of his vision. Transparent blue screens flickered into existence, hovering in the air like holograms. They glowed with crisp white text that made his head pound. Name, Kazuki. Class, Healer. Level, 1. HP, 1/1. MP, 50/50. Skills, Basic Healing, Unlocked, Paradox Vitality, Passive. He blinked, trying to clear the hallucination. But the screens remained, solid and real. Healer. HP of 1. What kind of cruel joke was this? His fingers brushed against the moss, and he noticed how pale his skin looked, almost translucent, like porcelain that might shatter at the slightest pressure. A cold dread settled in his stomach. This wasn't a dream. The ache in his bones, the chill of the cave, the impossible screens, it was all too vivid. He forced himself to take slow breaths, focusing on the details around him. The cave was small, perhaps 10 feet across, with a low ceiling that dripped water in a steady rhythm. Patches of bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls, casting eerie green shadows. A narrow opening, partially obscured by hanging vines, led to the outside world, where faint daylight seeped through. The ground was littered with small stones and broken twigs, and in one corner, a shallow pool of water reflected the fungal glow. Kazuki's thoughts raced. He'd read stories like this, Ice Sky, reincarnation, game worlds. But those were fantasies. This felt like a trap. A healer with 1 HP. That was a death sentence. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled, sending him crashing back to the moss. The impact was minor, but a sharp rock scraped against his forearm as he fell. Instantly, a searing pain lanced through him, and the HP bar on his status screen flickered violently, dropping to a hair-thin sliver before stabilizing at 1. He stared at the tiny red line, his breath catching. 1 hit point. A single scratch could kill him. Trembling, he examined the scrape on his arm. It was shallow, barely bleeding, but it felt like a mortal wound. Every sensation was amplified, the cool air on his skin, the grit under his nails, the pounding of his heart. He was fragile. Breakable. A living piece of glass in a world of hammers. Before he could process this further, a guttural snarl echoed from the cave entrance. Kazuki froze, his blood turning to ice. Something was moving outside, a shuffling, dragging sound, accompanied by labored breathing. The vines rustled, and a creature stumbled into the cave. It was humanoid but twisted, with mottled green skin, pointed ears, and a mouth full of jagged teeth. A goblin. It stood about 4 feet tall, clad in ragged leather scraps, and one of its legs was badly wounded. A deep gash ran from its thigh to its knee, oozing dark blood that left a trail on the moss. The creature's eyes, yellow and predatory, locked onto Kazuki. It snarled again, baring its teeth, and took a limping step forward, claws extending from its fingers. Kazuki's mind went blank with terror. He scrambled backward, his back hitting the damp wall of the cave. There was nowhere to go. The goblin advanced, its gaze fixed on him with hungry intensity. It didn't seem to care about its wound, only the potential prey before it. Instinct took over. Kazuki's hands came up, palms out, as if he could ward off the creature. His class was healer. He had a skill called basic healing. Maybe if he healed the goblin, it would leave him alone. It was a desperate, stupid thought, but it was all he had. He focused on the skill, and a warm tingling sensation spread through his fingers. Golden light began to gather around his hands, soft and gentle, like the glow of a sunrise. The goblin paused, its head tilting in confusion. It might have mistaken the light for a threat or a trick, but it didn't retreat. Kazuki, driven by panic, thrust his hands forward. The golden light shot from his palms, enveloping the goblin in a radiant aura. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the goblin's eyes widened. It let out a choked gurgle, its body convulsing violently. The golden light, instead of soothing the wound, seemed to burrow into the creature's flesh. The gash on its leg began to sizzle and blacken, spreading like rot. The goblin thrashed, claws scrabbling at the air, as its skin cracked and peeled away in glowing embers. A sickening pop echoed through the cave, and the creature combusted, its body dissolving into a cloud of fine, gray ash that drifted to the mossy floor. The light faded, leaving Kazuki in stunned silence. He stared at his hands, which still tingled with residual energy. The cave smelled of ozone and burnt hair. A new screen flashed before his eyes, bright and urgent. Skill unlocked, lethal touch. Effect, converts healing magic to massive damage upon contact with living targets. Cost, 10 MP per cast. MP remaining, 40/50. Horror washed over him, cold and suffocating. He hadn't healed the goblin. He'd killed it. His touch wasn't mending, it was annihilation. The skill name, Paradox Vitality, suddenly made terrible sense. He could heal nothing, but he could destroy everything. And he was stuck at 1 HP, a walking contradiction, a healer who brought death. His breaths came in shallow gasps. He looked at the pile of ash that had been a living creature. Guilt twisted in his gut, but it was quickly overshadowed by fear. What had he done? What was he? As he tried to process this, his foot slipped on the damp moss, and he stumbled. His arm brushed against a sharp outcropping of rock on the cave wall, the same rock that had scraped him earlier. This time, the contact was harder. A jolt of agony shot through his body, and his vision blurred. The HP bar on his status screen plummeted, the red line shrinking to a mere whisper of color, so thin it was almost invisible. It hovered there, trembling, before stabilizing again at 1. Kazuki collapsed to his knees, clutching his arm. The scrape was now a deeper cut, bleeding freely. He could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, each beat a reminder of his fragility. One more touch, one more misstep, and it would be over. He was a glass cannon in the most literal sense, a weapon that could shatter with the slightest impact. Tears welled in his eyes, but he forced them back. Survival. He had to survive. He focused on his status screen, searching for anything that could help. The skills list included agility boost, described as a passive buff that increased evasion. It had no MP cost, it was always active, a faint hum in his muscles that made him feel slightly lighter, more aware of his movements. He clung to that, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Then, a noise from the cave entrance snapped him back to reality. Shadows moved beyond the vines, multiple shapes, larger than the first goblin. The dim light from outside was blocked as 3 figures crowded the opening. Kazuki's breath caught in his throat. 3 more goblins stepped into the cave, their forms silhouetted against the daylight. They were unharmed, their claws glinting like polished obsidian in the green fungal glow. Their eyes, yellow and intelligent, scanned the cave, taking in the pile of ash, the trembling human on the ground. They sniffed the air, catching the scent of ozone and blood. One of them, slightly larger than the others, let out a low growl. It pointed a clawed finger at Kazuki, and the other 2 spread out, blocking the exit. They moved with a predatory grace, their muscles coiled, ready to pounce. Kazuki had nowhere to run. The cave walls closed in around him, damp and unyielding. His MP was at 40, enough for 4 casts of lethal touch, if he dared to use it. But touching them meant getting close, and getting close meant risk. His 1 HP glowed like a death sentence on his status screen. He rose slowly to his feet, his body trembling. The agility boost thrummed through him, making his senses sharpen. He could see the individual strands of moss on the floor, hear the drip of water like a drumbeat, feel the shift of air as the goblins advanced. But it wasn't enough. They were too many, too fast. The lead goblin snarled, saliva dripping from its jaws. It took a step forward, claws raised. The other 2 flanked it, cutting off any escape. Kazuki's mind raced, searching for a plan, a miracle. He had his lethal touch, but he was a healer who couldn't heal, a fighter who couldn't take a hit. The cave felt smaller, the air thicker. He backed up until his shoulders pressed against the cold stone wall. The goblins closed in, their eyes gleaming with hunger. Kazuki's hands came up again, golden light flickering uncertainly around his fingers. He had one chance, a desperate, deadly dance. And if he missed, if they touched him. The thought hung in the air, unfinished, as the goblins lunged. The cave's damp air grew thick with the stench of wet fur and rot as 3 goblins blocked the entrance, their yellow eyes gleaming in the faint light filtering through mossy cracks. Kazuki's back pressed against the cold stone wall, his breath coming in shallow gasps that echoed too loudly in the confined space. The scraped arm from the rock still throbbed, a constant reminder that his entire existence balanced on a single point of health. One goblin, taller than the others with a patch of mangy fur missing from its scalp, stepped forward. It held a rusty dagger, the blade pitted with age but still sharp enough to end everything. Kazuki's mind raced, fragments of the status screen flashing before his eyes, 1 HP, 40 MP remaining after the accidental incineration of the first creature. The numbers felt abstract until the goblin lunged. Time seemed to slow. The dagger arced toward his chest, a blur of tarnished metal. Kazuki twisted his body, muscles screaming in protest as he hadn't moved like this in whatever life he'd left behind. The blade whispered past his tunic, the fabric ripping as the tip caught the edge. He felt the cool air kiss his skin beneath, a millimeter of cloth had been all that stood between him and oblivion. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat that drowned out everything but the rush of blood in his ears. He stumbled backward, his boots slipping on the wet stone. The other 2 goblins fanned out, one with a crude wooden club, the other barehanded but with claws that looked like they could shred leather. They chattered in guttural tones, their movements coordinated like predators cornering prey. Kazuki's thoughts crystallized into a single, desperate focus: evade. Survive. Don't let anything touch you. Closing his eyes for a split second, he visualized the status screen. The skill points, 3 of them, unallocated from his awakening, glowed with potential. He pushed his consciousness toward agility boost, the passive buff that promised increased evasion at no MP cost. The points dissolved into the skill, and immediately, a subtle shift occurred. His senses sharpened, the goblins' movements seemed fractionally slower, their footfalls more distinct against the stone. It wasn't magic in the traditional sense, more like his body unlocking a latent capacity for speed, a whisper of grace woven into his very bones. But it demanded focus, a mental strain that felt like holding his breath underwater. The goblin with the dagger lunged again, this time aiming for his legs. Kazuki sidestepped, his body moving with a fluidity that surprised him. The dagger clanged against the wall, sparks flying. He could feel the air displacement, the near miss sending a chill down his spine. The club-wielding goblin swung from the left. Kazuki dropped into a crouch, the wood whistling over his head. He rolled to the side, his hands scraping against rough stone, coming up in a low stance. His MP pool, 40, taunted him. He needed an offense, but every spell cost precious energy. He remembered the ash of the first goblin, the way its body had disintegrated under the golden light. Lethal touch, 10 MP per cast. A touch-range weapon born from his cursed healing. The dagger goblin recovered, snarling as it advanced. Kazuki's mind calculated distances, angles. He couldn't afford to miss, couldn't afford to let them close enough to graze him. He took a step forward, feinting left, then darting right. His hand shot out, fingers brushing the goblin's leathery shoulder. He willed the spell to activate, feeling a drain as 10 MP vanished from his pool. Golden light erupted from his fingertips, but instead of the warm, restorative glow he'd expected from healing magic, it was cold and searing. The goblin's scream cut through the cave, a raw, animal sound of agony. Its flesh blackened where Kazuki had touched, the corruption spreading like ink in water. Cracks appeared in its skin, glowing with an inner fire, before the entire creature crumbled into ash that drifted to the cave floor. The dagger clattered beside the pile, now just a piece of forgotten metal. Kazuki staggered back, dizziness washing over him. The MP drain wasn't just numerical, it felt like a part of his vitality had been siphoned away, leaving him lightheaded and weak. The remaining 2 goblins hesitated, their eyes wide with fear. But hunger overrode caution. The club wielder charged, swinging wildly. Kazuki ducked under the blow, his enhanced agility letting him slip past like a shadow. He reached out, his palm connecting with the goblin's ribcage. Another 10 MP sacrificed. Another burst of golden death. This time, the disintegration was slower, the goblin's body withering from the inside out before collapsing into dust. Only one left, the bare-handed goblin, now backing toward the entrance, its claws raised in a defensive posture. Kazuki's MP was down to 20. He could feel the strain of maintaining, agility boost, the mental effort like a weight on his forehead. He needed to end this quickly. He advanced, each step measured, his eyes locked on the creature. The goblin turned to flee, but Kazuki was faster. He didn't use lethal touch, he couldn't spare the MP. Instead, he relied on speed alone, darting forward to feint and weave, driving the goblin back with sheer motion. It stumbled over a rock, falling with a yelp. Kazuki stood over it, panting, his body trembling with exhaustion. The goblin scrambled to its feet and bolted out of the cave, disappearing into the sunlight beyond. Silence descended, broken only by Kazuki's ragged breathing. He leaned against the wall, his legs threatening to give way. The cave floor was littered with ash and abandoned weapons, testaments to his lethal touch. He checked his status, 1 HP, 20 MP remaining. The scraped arm still ached, a dull reminder of his fragility. He spent a few moments just breathing, letting the adrenaline ebb away. The passive buff from agility boost hummed in the background, a constant drain on his focus but a necessary shield. He gathered what he could, the rusty dagger, though it felt useless in his hands given his inability to risk close combat, and a small pouch from one of the ash piles containing a few copper coins. His inventory was meager, but survival demanded pragmatism. Stepping toward the cave entrance, he squinted as sunlight flooded in, harsh and blinding after the gloom. The forest outside was a tapestry of greens and browns, ancient trees towering overhead, their leaves whispering in a gentle breeze. It should have felt peaceful, but every rustle of foliage set his nerves on edge. He emerged into the clearing, the grass soft under his boots. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe he might find respite. Then the sound reached him, distant, but unmistakable. Horns, deep and resonant, echoing through the valleys. They carried a note of authority, of purpose. Kazuki's blood ran cold. He turned toward the source, his enhanced perception picking up details he might have missed before, the glint of metal on a distant hill, the flutter of banners caught in the wind. Cresting the ridge, a patrol of knights came into view. Armor polished to a silver sheen, horses moving with disciplined grace. Their banners bore a symbol, a radiant sun encircled by beams of light, stark against white cloth. The Church of Light. Memories from his awakening flickered, whispers of heresy, of anomalies purged. His hand went to his chest, where his heart beat a frantic rhythm. They were still far off, but their direction suggested they were sweeping the area. Hunting. He didn't wait. Turning, he plunged into the dense undergrowth of the forest, his body moving with the agility he'd barely begun to master. Thorns snagged at his clothes, branches whipped past his face, but he pushed forward, driven by a primal urge to vanish. The horn sounded again, closer this time, a clarion call that promised no mercy. The sunlight dappled through the canopy, casting shifting shadows that seemed to reach for him. In that moment, Kazuki understood, his dance of death had only just begun, and the music was the sound of pursuit. The forest air tasted of damp earth and pine, but beneath it, Kazuki caught the metallic scent of polished steel. He pressed his back against the rough bark of an ancient oak, his breath coming in shallow, controlled bursts. Through the lattice of leaves, he watched the patrol crest the hill he'd fled from minutes before. 6 knights in gleaming plate armor moved with disciplined precision, their banners fluttering with the symbol of a radiant sun. At their head walked a paladin whose armor bore intricate golden filigree that seemed to drink the afternoon light. The paladin's helm was off, revealing a stern face with eyes that glowed with an unnatural, soft white luminescence as they swept across the clearing. Kazuki's heart hammered against his ribs. His status screen flickered at the edge of his vision, the red 1 HP burning like a brand of its own. He'd allocated his remaining skill points after the cave encounter, unlocking Perception Overdrive, alongside his passive Agility Boost. The descriptions had been clinical, 5 MP per minute for heightened senses, no direct combat application, but now, facing actual hunters, the words felt terrifyingly inadequate. Scout the perimeter, the paladin commanded, his voice carrying through the quiet forest with an authority that made the birds fall silent. The goblin disturbance reported from the eastern caves may be connected to the anomaly readings. A knight in lighter armor, a scout by the lack of heavy plating, nodded and moved toward the cave entrance Kazuki had fled. Kazuki watched, muscles coiled, as the scout knelt by the pile of goblin ashes that hadn't fully dissipated. The knight prodded the grey powder with a gloved finger, then recoiled as if burned. Captain Valerius, the scout called back, voice tight. This isn't natural decay. The residual energy, it's inverted. Unholy. The paladin, Valerius, approached, his glowing eyes narrowing. He didn't touch the ashes, but instead made a complex gesture with his hand. A pulse of white light washed over the area, causing the ashes to briefly flare with a sickly greenish hue before settling. Heretical magic, Valerius pronounced, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. An anomaly has manifested nearby. Fan out. Capture alive if possible, the Inquisitors will want to study this corruption. Kazuki's mind raced. They weren't just random knights, they were hunters specifically looking for people like him. The anomaly readings meant they had ways to detect whatever, paradox vitality, did to the world. He needed to move, to put distance between himself and these men whose very presence made his fragile body feel like glass about to shatter. Slowly, inch by agonizing inch, he began to edge away from the oak, keeping the massive trunk between himself and the patrol. His agility boost made his movements fluid, silent, but every rustle of leaves beneath his worn boots sounded like thunder in his ears. He'd made it 10 paces when a low growl cut through the forest stillness. A hound emerged from the brush to his left, not a natural beast, but something bred for hunting, with muscles coiled beneath short gray fur and eyes that held too much intelligence. It was leashed to a knight who followed close behind, the chain links whispering against armor. The hound's nostrils flared, catching his scent. Kazuki froze, his mind screaming at him to run even as his body recognized the futility. The knight followed the hound's gaze, his eyes widening beneath his helm. Contact, the knight shouted, yanking the hound's chain. East of the clearing. Kazuki didn't wait for the others to respond. He bolted, his enhanced agility carrying him through the underbrush with a speed that surprised even him. Branches whipped past his face, thorns tearing at his tunic but miraculously missing his skin. Behind him, he heard the crash of armored men giving pursuit, the baying of the hound, and Valerius's commanding voice calling orders. Flank him. Don't let him reach the river. A lance whistled past his ear, embedding itself in a tree trunk with a solid thunk. Kazuki didn't look back. He activated Perception Overdrive, feeling the immediate drain on his MP, 50 to 45, the numbers ticking down in his peripheral vision. The world sharpened into painful clarity. He could see individual dewdrops on leaves, hear the separate footfalls of each pursuer, smell the oil on their armor and the sweat beneath. Another knight cut him off from the right, emerging from behind a thicket with sword drawn. Kazuki pivoted, his body moving almost before his mind registered the threat. The sword swept through empty air where his neck had been a heartbeat before. He kept running, but the diversion had cost him. 2 more knights appeared ahead, blocking the path to deeper woods. Cornered. Again. He skidded to a halt, chest heaving. The knights formed a loose semicircle around him, weapons at the ready. Valerius approached from behind, his glowing eyes fixed on Kazuki with clinical detachment. Surrender, anomaly, the paladin said, his voice devoid of malice, which somehow made it worse. Your corruption can be studied, perhaps even purified. Kazuki's mind raced through options. His MP was at 40 now, Perception Overdrive, still active, costing him precious points. He had lethal touch, but it required physical contact. Getting close enough to touch any of these armored men meant getting within range of their weapons. One scratch, one solid hit, and his 1 HP would evaporate. The knight directly before him lunged, lance aimed not to kill but to incapacitate, a precise thrust toward his leg. Time seemed to slow. Through Perception Overdrive, Kazuki saw every detail, the slight tremor in the knight's grip, the way the lance point wavered by millimeters, the opening as the man overcommit. Kazuki didn't dodge away. He stepped into the thrust, his body twisting at the last possible moment. The lance grazed his tunic, tearing fabric but missing skin by less than an inch. His left hand shot out, fingers brushing against the knight's gauntlet where it gripped the weapon shaft. He didn't need to cast anything. Paradox Vitality reacted instantly. Golden light, the same color as healing magic, flared from the point of contact. For a heartbeat, it looked beautiful, benevolent. Then the knight screamed. The metal of his gauntlet blackened, then glowed red-hot, then dissolved as if consumed by invisible fire. The corruption raced up his arm, turning flesh to ash beneath the armor. The man stumbled back, clutching the stump of his wrist, his cries cutting off as 2 other knights dragged him away from Kazuki. Silence fell, broken only by the knight's ragged breathing. The others stared at the dissolving gauntlet, then at Kazuki, their weapons wavering. Stand firm. Valerius commanded, but even his voice held a new edge. It's a touch-range corruption. Maintain distance. The paladin raised his hands, fingers weaving through the air as he chanted in a language that made Kazuki's teeth ache. Symbols of light formed between Valerius's palms, complex geometric patterns that pulsed with power. Kazuki tried to move, to interrupt the casting, but two knights moved to block him, their shields forming a wall. The spell completed. A beam of concentrated white light shot from Valerius's hands, too fast to dodge. It struck Kazuki in the center of his chest. There was no pain. No damage to his HP. Instead, warmth spread through his torso, settling just below his collarbone. He looked down to see a symbol burning into his tunic, a stylized sun with a crack through its center, glowing with the same white light as Valerius's eyes. As he watched, the symbol seared through the fabric and branded itself onto his skin. The sensation was like ice and fire simultaneously, a deep, invasive cold that burned. The brand of heresy, Valerius announced, his voice echoing with finality. Wherever you go, the faithful will know you for what you are. The curse will drain your stamina, track your movements, and mark you for any who serve the light. Kazuki touched the brand. His fingers came away unburned, but the symbol pulsed beneath his skin, a rhythmic beat that matched his racing heart. Already he could feel it, a subtle sapping of his energy, like running with weights tied to his limbs. Take him, Valerius ordered. Kazuki didn't wait for the knights to close in. He turned and ran, not with strategy this time, but with pure, desperate panic. Perception overdrive showed him openings in their formation, a gap between two knights who were still shaken by their comrade's injury. He dove through it, hitting the ground in a roll that sent leaves flying. Arrows whistled past him. One grazed his sleeve. Another embedded itself in a tree inches from his head. He didn't look back, didn't think, just ran with every ounce of enhanced agility he possessed. The forest blurred around him, becoming a tunnel of green and brown with only one imperative: away. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs trembled. Until the sounds of pursuit faded behind him. Until the sun dipped below the tree line, painting the sky in shades of violet and orange. Only then did he slow, stumbling through a thicket and emerging at the bank of a narrow stream. Collapsing to his knees, he gulped air that tasted of moss and running water. His MP had drained to 15 during the flight, perception overdrive, finally deactivating from lack of energy. The brand on his chest still glowed, a soft white light that illuminated the gathering dusk around him. With each pulse, he felt a little weaker, a little more tired, as if the symbol were drinking his vitality sip by sip. He splashed water on his face, the cold shock clearing some of the fog from his mind. In the stream's reflection, he saw his own haggard face, pale, eyes wide with lingering terror, the heretic brand glowing beneath his torn tunic. And then he saw something else. Shadows moved in the trees behind his reflection. Not the solid forms of knights in armor, but something other. Slender, humanoid shapes that seemed woven from darkness itself. Their eyes glowed with pinpricks of amber light, fixed on the pulsing brand on his chest. One by one, they emerged from between the trees, silent as ghosts, drawn to the curse like moths to flame. Kazuki froze, his reflection staring back at him with dawning horror as the shadowy figures took another step closer, their glowing eyes unwavering. Kazuki's consciousness returned to the sound of low, guttural growls that vibrated through the damp earth beneath him. His body ached with a deep, marrow-level exhaustion, every muscle protesting as he forced his eyes open. The heretic mark on his chest pulsed with a sickly, intermittent glow that cast shifting shadows across the forest floor. It wasn't just a visual phenomenon, he could feel it, a cold weight that seemed to leach warmth from his core with each heartbeat. 5 shadowy forms circled him, their outlines shimmering like heat haze. They resembled wolves but were composed of shifting darkness, with glowing amber eyes that matched those he'd glimpsed before collapsing. Their paws left no prints in the soft moss, and when one opened its maw, no sound emerged, only a ripple in the air that made Kazuki's skin prickle. Shadow stalkers, his mind supplied, though he didn't know how he knew the name. One stalker lunged without warning, its claws extending into ethereal talons that tore through the air with a sound like ripping silk. Kazuki's body reacted before his mind could process the threat, rolling sideways in a spray of damp leaves. The claws passed through where his shoulder had been, and he felt a chill so profound it stole his breath, not physical contact, but something worse, as if the very essence of the attack had brushed against his soul. His MP counter flickered in his vision, 15/50. The brand of heresy pulsed again, and he felt a fresh wave of fatigue wash over him, as though he'd just run a mile. The stamina drain wasn't just theoretical, it was a tangible weight dragging at his limbs. 2 more stalkers converged from opposite sides, their movements synchronized in a pincer attack. Kazuki's mind raced through his limited options. Agility boost was passive, already active, but it wouldn't be enough against creatures that seemed to phase through conventional physics. Perception overdrive would cost 5 MP per minute, precious resources he couldn't spare. Lethal touch required contact, and getting close meant risking that chilling touch. There was only one skill left. As the lead stalker's jaws snapped toward his throat, Kazuki focused on the unfamiliar skill in his status screen, ethereal dodge. The description had been vague, phases the user slightly out of reality briefly, but the cost was clear, 15 MP per use. Nearly all his remaining magic. He activated it. The world fractured into overlapping layers. Colors bled into muted grays, sounds became distant echoes, and his own body felt insubstantial, as though he were watching himself from several feet away. The stalker's attack passed through him, but this time there was no chill, only a strange, weightless sensation, like being submerged in still water. The skill lasted less than a second before reality snapped back into focus with jarring suddenness. Kazuki stumbled, his head swimming with disorientation. The MP counter now read 0/50, and a new debuff appeared, fatigued, movement speed reduced by 20% for 30 minutes. His breath came in ragged gasps, each inhalation burning in his chest. The shadow stalkers hesitated, their amber eyes narrowing as they reassessed their prey. They circled more cautiously now, as if uncertain what had just occurred. Kazuki used the momentary reprieve to scramble backward, his hands scrabbling for purchase on roots and stones. His mind worked frantically. Without MP, lethal touch was useless. Ethereal dodge was exhausted. He was down to pure evasion and whatever pitiful strength remained in his 1 HP body. One stalker darted in, testing. Kazuki twisted away, but his movements were sluggish from fatigue. The creature's flank brushed against his outstretched hand, and where contact occurred, golden light erupted from his fingertips. Lethal touch had activated automatically. The stalker didn't scream. It simply unraveled, its shadowy form dissipating into tendrils of mist that hung in the air for a moment before fading entirely. Kazuki stared at his hand, stunned. The skill had triggered without MP cost. No, his status screen showed MP still at 0, but a new notification appeared, paradox vitality, passive effect, lethal energy discharge upon hostile contact. No MP cost for touch-based activation against aggressive targets. 4 stalkers remained. They seemed to understand what had happened to their companion, because they attacked simultaneously from all directions. Kazuki became a study in desperate motion. He ducked beneath sweeping claws, rolled over fallen logs, and used tree trunks as momentary shields. Each movement was calculated not for elegance but for survival, every dodge bringing him closer to exhaustion. The brand of heresy pulsed rhythmically, each pulse sapping another fraction of his dwindling stamina. He could feel it now as a physical sensation, a cold thread connecting the mark to some distant, malevolent source. When the next opportunity came, he didn't hesitate. As a stalker overextended its lunge, Kazuki sidestepped and pressed his palm against its haunch. Golden light flared again, and another creature dissolved into mist. 3 left. They grew more cunning, attacking in staggered patterns that forced Kazuki to constantly shift direction. One fainted high while another swept low at his legs. He jumped, but his fatigued muscles betrayed him, he didn't clear the attack entirely. The stalker's ethereal claws grazed his boot. Ice shot up his leg, not physical cold but something deeper, a numbness that spread through his flesh and bone. His HP bar didn't move, still that terrifyingly thin sliver at 1/1, but a new status appeared, soul chill, movement impaired, reaction time reduced. Panic clawed at his throat. If he couldn't move properly, he was dead. The 2 remaining stalkers sensed weakness and pressed their advantage. Kazuki backed toward a massive oak, putting the thick trunk at his back to limit attack angles. His mind raced through possibilities, discarding each as impossible. No MP debuffed. Exhausted. Hunted. Then he remembered the rusty dagger looted from the goblins. He drew it with trembling hands. The blade was pitted and dull, but it was solid steel. When the next stalker lunged, he didn't try to dodge. Instead, he met the attack with the dagger held flat against his forearm. The ethereal claws passed through the metal as though it weren't there, but something changed, the attack's intensity diminished, as if the physical object had disrupted whatever energy composed the creature. Emboldened, Kazuki reversed the motion, slashing upward with the dagger while simultaneously reaching with his other hand. His fingers brushed shadow stuff. Golden light erupted for the 3rd time, and another stalker vanished. 1 remained. It stared at him across the clearing, its amber eyes unblinking. The standoff lasted 10 heartbeats, 20. Kazuki's leg trembled from the soul chill, his breath forming pale clouds in the pre-dawn air. The heretic mark glowed steadily now, a beacon in the gathering gloom. The final stalker didn't attack. It turned and melted into the shadows between trees, leaving Kazuki alone with his pounding heart and the creeping awareness of his own fragility. He collapsed against the oak, sliding down its rough bark until he sat in the leaf litter. Every part of him hurt. The soul chill in his leg was slowly receding, replaced by a deep, bone-weary ache. The brand of heresy continued its steady drain, and he could feel his consciousness wavering, threatening to slip away again. He needed shelter. Rest. Time to recover MP. Using the dagger as a makeshift cane, Kazuki pushed himself upright and began limping through the forest. Perception overdrive was unavailable without MP, but his passive, agility boost, still heightened his senses enough to notice subtle details, a depression in the terrain where water had carved soft stone, a cluster of ferns that grew unusually thick in one particular spot. It took an hour of painful progress, but he found it, a narrow crevice in a rocky hillside, hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines. The opening was just wide enough to squeeze through sideways. Inside, the space opened into a small cave no larger than a closet, but it was dry and, more importantly, concealed. Kazuki crawled inside and collapsed against the far wall. The heretic mark's glow illuminated the space with faint, pulsing light, revealing smooth stone walls and a floor of compacted earth. It was barren, but it was safe. For the next several hours, he did nothing but breathe. Meditation didn't come naturally, his mind kept circling back to the burning goblin, the branding ritual, the shadow stalker's chilling touch. But gradually, as he focused on the rhythm of his own heartbeat, a strange calm settled over him. His MP began to regenerate. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed as he consciously directed his focus inward. 5 MP after the first hour. 15 after the second. By the time faint gray light began filtering through the vine curtain, he'd recovered to 35/50ths. The fatigue debuff had expired, though a general weariness remained. The soul chill was gone, leaving only ordinary soreness. But the brand of heresy still pulsed, its drain a constant background presence like a slowly leaking bucket. As dawn proper broke, Kazuki emerged from the cave. His body protested every movement, but hunger was a sharper motivator than pain. He needed food, water, information. He moved through the forest with renewed caution, using trees as cover and pausing frequently to listen. The rusty dagger remained in his hand, its weight a small comfort. He found a stream and drank deeply, the cold water clearing some of the fog from his mind. Edible berries grew in a sunlit patch, he recognized them from some half-remembered survival guide, though he couldn't say how he knew they were safe. He was gathering a handful when the heretic mark suddenly flared with painful intensity. Kazuki gasped, clutching his chest as the symbol burned against his skin. Through the trees, perhaps half a mile distant, he saw cleared land and the thatched roofs of a village. Smoke curled from chimneys into the morning sky. And then the bells began. First one, clear and sharp, ringing from what must have been a church steeple. Then others joined in, a discordant chorus that carried across the distance. Villagers emerged from their homes, pointing toward the forest, toward him. Their shouts were too distant to make out words, but the meaning was clear in their gestures, in the way they gathered weapons and formed groups. The brand of heresy wasn't just draining his stamina. It was announcing his presence to every follower of the light. Kazuki turned and ran, his heart hammering against his ribs. The chase was beginning again, but this time he had no knights to outwit, he had an entire village, and whatever forces the church would send when the alarm reached them. The forest swallowed him once more, but the tolling bells followed, each peal a reminder that in this world, there was no place to hide. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of the whispering woods, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor where Kazuki crouched behind a moss-covered boulder. His chest ached with a dull, persistent throb, the brand of heresy etched into his skin pulsed with a faint amber light that seemed to grow brighter with each passing hour. He pressed a hand against the mark, feeling the unnatural warmth seep through his tunic. The curse wasn't just draining his stamina, it was broadcasting his location like a beacon to anyone attuned to the light. Kazuki's fingers trembled as he checked his status. MP, 35/50ths. HP, 1/1. The numbers hadn't changed since his meditation in the cave, but the fatigued debuff still lingered in his muscles, making every movement feel like wading through thick mud. The soul chill from the shadow stalker's graze had faded, but a phantom coldness lingered in his left foot, a reminder of how close he'd come to death. Through the trees, he could see the village proper, a collection of perhaps 24 timber and thatch buildings clustered around a central well. Smoke curled from chimneys, carrying the scent of baking bread that made his stomach clench with hunger. He hadn't eaten properly since awakening in this world. The copper coins from the goblins jingled softly in his pocket as he shifted position, the sound barely audible over the chirping of forest birds. I need supplies, he thought, his mind racing. Food, water, information. Maybe they have a healer who can. He stopped himself, the irony bitter on his tongue. He was the healer. The one who couldn't heal. Kazuki took a deep breath, activating perception overdrive. The world snapped into hyperfocus. 5 MP drained instantly, leaving him at 30. Colors grew more vibrant, the deep green of the moss, the rich brown of the tree bark, the distant flutter of a bluebird's wings. Sound separated into distinct layers, the crunch of gravel under a villager's boot 50 yards away, the squeak of a well pulley, the murmured conversation between 2 women hanging laundry. He studied the villagers. Farmers in simple tunics, children chasing a wooden hoop, an elderly man whittling on a porch. None wore armor. None carried weapons beyond simple tools. They looked normal. Human. Not like the knights with their glowing eyes and judgmental stares. Maybe I can pass, Kazuki thought, pulling his tunic tighter to conceal the brand on his chest. He'd found a relatively clean section of cloth in the cave and had used it to wrap his right hand, hiding the mark that had appeared there after Valerius's spell. The fabric was coarse and itchy, but it covered the glowing symbol. He stepped out from behind the boulder, moving with deliberate slowness. Agility boost, thrummed through his veins, a passive current of enhanced reflexes that made his steps light and precise. He kept to the tree line at first, watching for any reaction. The first villager to notice him was a young girl carrying a basket of wildflowers. She paused, her eyes widening. Kazuki offered what he hoped was a friendly smile. The girl dropped her basket and ran. A cold dread settled in Kazuki's stomach. He glanced at his wrapped hand. Through the thin fabric, an amber glow was visible, growing brighter with each step toward the village. The brand was reacting to the proximity of so many followers of the light. No, 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 he thought, quickening his pace. He needed to get in and out before. Heretic. The shout came from a burly man chopping wood near the village entrance. He dropped his axe, pointing a trembling finger at Kazuki's hand. The wrapped cloth might as well have been glass for all the concealment it provided now. The brand shone through like a lantern in fog. Doors slammed open. Villagers emerged from their homes, their faces a mix of fear and anger. A woman snatched up her child and hurried inside. A man grabbed a pitchfork from against a wall. Kazuki's heart hammered against his ribs. One hit. That's all it would take. A single pitchfork tine, a thrown stone, an arrow, anything that broke his skin would mean instant death. His 1 HP wasn't a number. It was a death sentence waiting to be executed. He raised his hands, palms outward. I mean no harm. The word sounded hollow even to him. The brand on his hand pulsed brighter, responding to the gathering crowd's faith. It felt like holding his hand over an open flame. By the grace of the light, begone, abomination. The voice came from the village's small chapel, a simple wooden structure with a sun symbol carved above its door. A priest emerged, an older man with silver hair and robes of white and gold. He carried a staff topped with a crystal that caught the sunlight and refracted it into rainbow patterns. Kazuki's perception overdrive showed him the magical energy gathering around the priest. It wasn't the violent, combat-ready aura of Paladin Valerius, but something purer, more focused. A healing energy turned weapon. I don't want trouble, Kazuki said, backing away. His eyes darted, calculating escape routes. The village had no walls, but the crowd was forming a semicircle, cutting off his retreat to the deeper woods. To his left, a narrow alley between 2 buildings. To his right, the well and open space. The priest raised his staff. Your very presence defile this sacred ground. The brand of heresy marks you as cursed, a blight upon creation. I shall purify what cannot be saved. The crystal at the staff's tip flared with white light. Kazuki felt it before he saw it, a wave of cleansing energy that washed over him. It should have been healing. Should have been restorative. Instead, fire erupted in his veins. Kazuki screamed. The sound tore from his throat, raw and desperate. The purification spell wasn't attacking his body directly, it was attacking the curse, the brand, the unnatural magic that made him what he was. And since that magic was woven into his very being thanks to paradox vitality, attacking it meant attacking him. White-hot agony seared through every nerve. His vision blurred. His knees buckled. The fatigued debuff magnified the pain, making it impossible to think, to move, to breathe. Move, his survival instinct screamed. Move. He forced himself upright, agility boost, responding to the adrenaline flooding his system. The world snapped back into focus. The priest was chanting again, gathering energy for another spell. Villagers had picked up stones. A guard near the chapel knocked an arrow to his bow. Time slowed. Kazuki didn't think, he reacted. He darted forward, not away, but toward the crowd. A stone flew toward his head. He ducked, feeling the wind of its passage through his hair. Another came from the left. He twisted, the stone grazing his tunic instead of his skull. The guard loosed his arrow. Kazuki saw it in perfect detail, the fletching spinning, the iron tip gleaming, the trajectory that would punch through his throat. He dropped into a roll, the arrow embedding itself in the dirt where his neck had been a heartbeat before. He came up running, weaving through the villagers like a ghost. Their reactions were too slow, their movements telegraphed. A man swung a broom handle. Kazuki slid under it, his back scraping against the gravel path. A woman tried to grab him, he sidestepped, her fingers brushing empty air. The priest stood his ground, staff raised high. Face your judgment, heretic. Kazuki didn't slow. He couldn't afford to. Another purification spell would incapacitate him, and then the stones would find their mark. He had one chance. As he closed the distance, he reached out with his right hand, the wrapped hand, the branded hand. The priest brought his staff down in a sweeping arc, aiming for Kazuki's head. Kazuki didn't try to block. Instead, he reached past the staff, his fingers brushing against the priest's white robe sleeve. Lethal touch, activated. There was no MP cost. Paradox Vitality recognized the priest as a hostile target, not because the man was attacking, but because his purification magic had triggered the curse's defensive mechanisms. Physical contact was all that was needed. The effect was instantaneous but not fatal. Kazuki had barely grazed the fabric, not touched skin. But that was enough. The priest's robe sleeve blackened where Kazuki's fingers had brushed it. The material didn't just burn, it disintegrated, turning to ash that fell away in a perfect handprint shape. Beneath, the priest's arm showed angry red burns, but the flesh remained intact. The man stumbled back, his chanting cut off mid-syllable. He stared at his arm, then at Kazuki, his eyes wide with something beyond fear, with primal, superstitious terror. What manner of demon? Kazuki didn't wait for an answer. He pushed past the stunned priest, sprinting for the alley between buildings. More stones flew, but his enhanced agility made him a difficult target. He rounded a corner, nearly colliding with a chicken coop, then burst out the other side of the village into the tree line. He didn't stop running until the village was out of sight, until the shouts had faded to distant echoes, until his lungs burned and his legs threatened to give out. Only then did he collapse against a tree, gasping for air. The brand on his hand had dimmed, but it still glowed faintly. The pain from the purification spell lingered like a bad sunburn across his entire body. He checked his status. MP 25/50. He'd maintained perception overdrive through the entire encounter. No new debuffs, but the fatigued status hadn't lifted either. Idiot, he thought, slumping against the tree. Stupid, reckless idiot. He'd hoped for supplies, for information. Instead, he'd nearly gotten himself killed and had terrified an entire village. The priest would report this. The church would know he'd been here. They'd send more hunters, better prepared. Kazuki closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. When he opened them again, he noticed something leaning against a nearby stump, a worn leather backpack, discarded or forgotten. He approached cautiously, half expecting a trap. The backpack contained meager supplies, a half-empty water skin, a chunk of hard cheese wrapped in cloth, a few strips of dried meat, and a tinderbox. But at the bottom, folded carefully, was a map. Kazuki spread it on the ground, weighing the corners with stones. The parchment was old, the ink faded in places, but still legible. He recognized none of the place names at first: Windcrest, Silver Vein, Dawn's Edge. Then he found a small notation near the bottom: Borderlands, uncharted beyond this point. He was in the Borderlands. The edge of civilized territory. Beyond lay, nothing. Or rather, nothing marked on the map. Monster territories. Ancient ruins. The domains of beings that didn't follow the light. No safe havens, he realized, tracing the map with a finger. The nearest city marked was 3 days' travel to the east, and it flew the Church of Light's banner on the map. Every settlement within a week's journey was under church influence. He was trapped in hostile territory with a curse that announced his presence to every faithful soul nearby. No allies. No sanctuary. Just endless running. Kazuki packed the supplies into the backpack, slinging it over his shoulders. The food and water would keep him alive a few more days. The map was both a gift and a condemnation. It showed him how alone he truly was. He was about to move deeper into the forest when he heard it. Hoofbeats. Not the casual trot of a farmer's horse. These were the rhythmic, disciplined beats of trained warhorses moving at speed. Many of them. Kazuki dropped flat behind the stump, peering through the undergrowth. A squad of paladins emerged from the tree line to the south, 6 riders in gleaming plate armor, their white cloaks streaming behind them. They moved with purpose, not searching, but tracking. At their head rode a paladin who carried not a weapon, but a relic, a silver disc about the size of a dinner plate, etched with intricate runes. As Kazuki watched, the relic pulsed with light, a bright, rhythmic flash that synchronized with the throbbing of the brand on his chest. The lead paladin raised the relic, turning slowly. The pulsing quickened as he faced Kazuki's direction. Then stopped. Held steady. The paladin pointed directly at Kazuki's hiding place. "There," he shouted, his voice cutting through the forest quiet. "The heretic hides behind the stump. Surround him." The other paladins spurred their horses, fanning out in a practiced maneuver that cut off every escape route. Their swords gleamed in the dappled sunlight. Their eyes glowed with the same holy light that had marked Kazuki for death. Kazuki's hand went to the rusty dagger at his belt. 6 paladins. On horseback. With a relic that could pinpoint his exact location through the brand. He had 25 MP. 1 HP. A backpack with some food. And a map that told him nowhere was safe. The lead paladin lowered the relic, drawing his sword instead. The blade ignited with white flame. "In the name of the light," he called out, his voice echoing through the trees, "your running ends here, abomination." Kazuki rose slowly from behind the stump, his every muscle tense, his mind racing through options that didn't exist. The paladins formed a tightening circle around him, their horses snorting and stamping. The brand on his chest burned hotter than ever, responding to their proximity. He was cornered. Outnumbered. Outmatched. And he had exactly one chance to not die. Hoofbeats thundered through the forest like a drumbeat of doom. Kazuki's lungs burned with each ragged breath as he sprinted through the dense undergrowth, the brand of heresy on his chest pulsing with a sickly golden light that seemed to scream his location to the world. Behind him, 6 paladins on enchanted steeds crashed through the foliage, their silver armor gleaming even in the shadowed woods. Heretic. Stand and face divine judgment. The lead paladin's voice boomed through the trees, carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Kazuki didn't dare look back, his agility boost kept his feet moving with unnatural speed, but he could feel the gap closing. The paladins' horses moved with supernatural grace, their hooves barely touching the ground as they navigated the treacherous terrain. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Kazuki's instincts screamed before his mind could process the threat. He threw himself to the right as a holy javelin of pure light streaked past, tearing through the fabric of his cloak and grazing his shoulder. Not a direct hit, thank whatever gods might be listening, but the near miss sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with temperature. The javelin embedded itself in an ancient oak tree, which immediately began to smolder with holy fire. Perception overdrive, Kazuki gasped, the words barely audible over his pounding heart. 5 MP drained from his reserves, leaving him with 20 remaining. The world snapped into hyperfocus. Every leaf, every twig, every shifting shadow became a data point in his desperate calculus of survival. He could see the paladins' formation, 3 in front, 3 flanking, the lead paladin holding aloft a relic that pulsed with the same rhythm as his brand. He could hear their breathing, the creak of their armor, the whispered prayers that fueled their pursuit. Most importantly, he could see the terrain ahead with crystal clarity. The forest floor dropped away sharply 50 yards to his left, a ravine, deep and shadowed, with a narrow gap where ancient rock had split. The other side looked reachable, maybe, if he had enough speed and didn't hesitate. Another javelin flew. This one came from his blind side, thrown by a paladin who had broken formation to cut him off. Kazuki didn't think, he reacted. Ethereal dodge. 15 MP vanished in an instant, leaving him with only 5. For a fraction of a second, his body phased out of reality, becoming insubstantial as morning mist. The javelin passed through where his heart should have been, striking the ground and exploding in a shower of dirt and holy light. The backlash of the skill hit him immediately. His vision swam, and the fatigued, debuff that had been lingering since his encounter with the Shadow Stalkers intensified into a bone-deep weariness. But he couldn't stop. The ravine was 20 yards away now, then 10. He's heading for the chasm, one of the paladins shouted. Cut him off. Kazuki poured every ounce of remaining strength into his legs. The edge of the ravine rushed toward him, a jagged tear in the earth, 20 feet across, with a drop that vanished into darkness below. He didn't slow. He didn't calculate. He simply leaped. For a terrifying moment, he hung in the air, suspended between certain death below and certain death behind. The wind whipped at his clothes. The brand on his chest flared with agonizing heat. Then his feet struck loose gravel on the far side, and he scrambled forward, clawing at the earth as he dragged himself over the edge. Behind him, the paladins reined in their steeds at the precipice. Their horses whinnied in protest, magical hooves skidding on the loose stone. The lead paladin raised a hand, halting his squad. The gap is too wide for the horses, he said, his voice tight with frustration. But he cannot escape the light's gaze. Kazuki didn't wait to hear more. His eyes fell on a thick vine that stretched across the ravine, anchored to a massive tree on his side and what remained of an old bridge support on the other. An idea, desperate and reckless, formed in his mind. He staggered to his feet, his hand outstretched. Lethal touch. No MP cost, the skill activated through pure physical contact as his fingers brushed the ancient vine. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the vine blackened, the decay spreading like ink through water. It didn't just wither, it disintegrated, the fibers turning to ash that drifted down into the darkness. The vine snapped, and with a groan of protesting wood, the remains of the bridge support on the far side collapsed, taking a section of the cliff edge with it in a shower of rock and dirt. The paladins backed their horses away from the crumbling edge. The lead paladin's eyes narrowed as he watched the debris fall. Unholy magic, he murmured, his hand tightening on the relic. But temporary. The brand will not let him rest. We will find another crossing. Kazuki didn't stay to listen. He turned and stumbled deeper into the woods on the far side of the ravine, his body screaming with exhaustion. The fatigued, debuff was more than just tiredness now, it felt like weights attached to every limb, like his blood had been replaced with lead. His MP sat at a dangerously low 5, and the brand continued its slow, relentless drain on his stamina. He walked for what felt like hours, though the position of the sun told him it had been less than one. Every sound made him flinch, every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call. The forest here was different from the one he'd left behind. The trees were older, their trunks thick and gnarled, their branches forming a canopy so dense that only slivers of sunlight pierced through. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. Just as he was about to collapse, he saw it, a dark opening in the side of a moss-covered hill, half hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines. A cave. Shelter. Kazuki approached cautiously, his senses still heightened from the fading effects of perception overdrive. No tracks led to the entrance. No signs of recent habitation. Just silence and shadow. He pushed aside the vines and stepped inside. The cave was larger than he expected. The entrance opened into a chamber about 30 feet across, with a ceiling that rose into darkness. Stalactites hung like stone teeth, and the air was cool and still. More importantly, it was empty. No monsters. No paladins. Just blessed, quiet darkness. He sank to the floor, his back against the cold stone wall, and allowed himself to breathe for the first time since the chase began. His hands shook as he opened the discarded backpack he'd taken from the village. The water skin was still half full. He drank sparingly, the water tasting like salvation. The food, hard bread and dried meat, felt like a feast as he forced himself to eat slowly, knowing his body needed the energy. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the entrance, he noticed something strange about the cave walls. They weren't natural stone, at least, not entirely. Sections had been smoothed by tools, and as he looked closer, he realized there were carvings. Kazuki pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the protest of his muscles. He moved deeper into the cave, his fingers tracing the lines etched into the stone. The carvings were ancient, worn by time, but still discernible. They told a story in pictures. The first panel showed a figure with hands that glowed with a familiar, sickly light, the same golden hue as his lethal touch. The figure stood before a crowd, their faces twisted in fear and anger. Kazuki's breath caught in his throat. The resemblance was uncanny, not in features, but in posture, in the way the light radiated from the hands. The second panel showed the figure fleeing, pursued by armored warriors bearing the symbol of a radiant sun, the same symbol the Church of Light paladins wore on their tabards. The third panel showed the figure standing alone on a mountain peak, looking out over a landscape consumed by darkness. And the fourth panel. Kazuki stepped closer, his heart pounding. This carving was larger, more detailed than the others. It showed the figure facing a monstrous being, a creature of shadow and flame with eyes that burned like coals even in the stone. The Demon Lord. Between them, an inscription had been carved in a language Kazuki shouldn't have been able to read, but the meaning flowed into his mind as if placed there by the stone itself. The paradox bearer shall face the Demon Lord's wrath. The words hung in the air, heavy with prophecy and warning. Kazuki stared at the carving, at the figure with glowing hands, at the monster that awaited. The brand on his chest pulsed in time with his heartbeat, a constant reminder that he was marked, hunted, alone. But not entirely alone, he realized. Someone had been here before. Someone with his curse. Someone who had faced what he now faced. The cave seemed to grow colder. From deeper in the darkness, beyond the reach of the faint light from the entrance, something stirred. Not a sound, exactly, more like a shift in the air, a presence that hadn't been there moments before. Kazuki froze, his hand instinctively moving to where his lethal touch awaited. He was no longer alone in the cave. The presence Kazuki sensed wasn't a creature, it was the faint hum of ancient machinery. The cave's darkness wasn't empty, it was a threshold. He pressed his back against the rough stone wall, his breathing shallow. The brand of heresy on his hand pulsed with a dull ache, a constant reminder of the paladins who might still be searching the ravine above. But here, in this subterranean silence, something older than the church's doctrines waited. Kazuki's fingers traced the murals he'd discovered earlier. The glowing hands in the carvings matched the sickly light that sometimes flickered around his own when lethal touch activated. The inscription's warning, the paradox bearer shall face the demon lord's wrath, echoed in his mind. He wasn't just a heretic, he was part of some forgotten prophecy. A draft whispered through the cave, carrying the scent of ozone and dust. Kazuki activated, perception overdrive, the world sharpening into painful clarity. His MP dropped to 0/50 instantly, the cost of maintaining the skill for even a few seconds draining his last reserves. The fatigued debuff made his limbs feel like lead, but he pushed through. There, behind a collapsed section of wall that looked natural to ordinary sight, his heightened senses detected perfectly straight lines. Ancient masonry. He scraped away centuries of sediment with trembling hands, revealing a stone archway sealed by a slab. With no MP left for ethereal dodge, he had to rely on raw strength, his 1 HP body straining against the weight. The slab groaned, then slid aside with a shower of dust. Beyond lay ruins. The chamber was vast, its ceiling supported by pillars carved with geometric patterns that glowed with residual magic. Kazuki's boots crunched on shattered pottery as he entered. The air was dry and still, preserved by some enchantment. Along the walls, humanoid shapes stood frozen, stone constructs with gemstone eyes that reflected no light. They looked like guardians, but their poses suggested they'd been deactivated long ago. Kazuki moved cautiously, his agility boost, passive making his steps whisper quiet. His inventory was meager, the water skin, some dried rations, the tinderbox, and the map from the discarded backpack. Nothing here would help if those constructs woke. At the chamber's center stood a dais with a control panel of crystal and bronze. Symbols glowed faintly on its surface, similar to those in the cave murals. Kazuki approached, his hand hovering over the panel. Should he touch it? The journal he'd seen mentioned in the outline wasn't visible yet, perhaps it lay deeper in the ruins. He never got to decide. A grinding sound echoed through the chamber as one of the constructs shuddered to life. Gemstone eyes flared with blue light. The stone golem was 8 feet tall, its body composed of interlocking plates that scraped together as it moved. It raised a fist the size of Kazuki's torso, and he knew with absolute certainty, one hit would reduce his 1 HP body to paste. Instinct took over. Kazuki dove sideways as the fist slammed into the ground where he'd stood, cracking the ancient floor. Dust billowed around him. He rolled to his feet, heart hammering against his ribs. Lethal touch was useless. The golem wasn't alive, no heartbeat, no biology to reverse. His healing magic would do nothing. This fight would be pure evasion. The golem swung again, a horizontal arc that would have sheared him in half. Kazuki activated, agility boost, his body moving faster than thought. He ducked under the blow, feeling the wind of its passage ruffle his hair. But the fatigued debuff dragged at him, making his reaction sluggish. The golem's backhand caught the edge of his tunic, tearing cloth but thankfully not skin. Too close. Kazuki backed toward the dais, his mind racing. The golem followed, its movements mechanical but relentless. He needed ethereal dodge, but with 0 MP, he couldn't use it. He had to recover some mana, and fast. He focused inward, reaching for the meditation techniques he'd used in the cave after the Shadow Stalker fight. Even as he dodged another fist that shattered a pillar, he tried to calm his breathing, to draw energy from somewhere. The brand of heresy burned hotter, resisting his efforts. The church's curse seemed designed to hinder recovery. Minutes stretched into an eternity of near misses. Kazuki danced between the golem's attacks, his movements growing more desperate. Once, he had to throw himself flat as a stone foot stomped down inches from his head. The impact sent vibrations through the floor that rattled his bones. His MP ticked upward agonizingly slowly, 1, 2, 5. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 10 minutes, he reached 15 MP, enough for one ethereal dodge. The golem charged, its bulk surprisingly fast. Kazuki waited until the last possible moment, then activated the skill. The world blurred as he phased partially out of reality. The golem passed through him, its stone body offering no resistance. Kazuki reappeared behind it, his MP dropping back to 0. He was at the dais now. The control panel glowed invitingly. But the golem was already turning, its gemstone eyes locking onto him again. Think. The murals showed someone with his ability. Maybe this place was built by or for paradox bearers. What would they have done? Kazuki placed his hand on the panel. The symbols beneath his fingers warned. He had no healing spells prepared. Lethal touch required either MP or physical contact with a living target, neither of which applied here. But out of sheer desperation, he tried to reverse the flow anyway, imagining healing energy pouring into the machine but inverted, corrupted. Nothing happened at first. Then the panel's glow turned from blue to the sickly green of his lethal touch. The change spread through the crystal like cracks in ice. The golem froze mid-step, its eyes flickering. A high-pitched whine filled the chamber as ancient magic short-circuited. With a final grinding shudder, the construct collapsed into a pile of inert stone. The gemstone eyes dimmed to darkness. Kazuki slumped against the dais, gasping for breath. His body trembled with exhaustion. The fatigued debuff felt like it had cemented into his bones. But he was alive. He allowed himself a few minutes to recover, drinking sparingly from his water skin. His MP began to regenerate again, slowly, 5. 10, as his strength returned, he explored the chamber properly. Behind the dais, he found a recess containing artifacts. A lightweight cloak of gray fabric that felt strangely cool to the touch. When he put it on, his own footsteps became nearly silent. The cloak muffled sound. More valuable was a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. Kazuki opened it carefully. The script was in an ancient language, but illustrations accompanied the text. One showed a figure with glowing hands facing a monstrous shape, the demon lord, perhaps. Another depicted the same figure being pursued by robed figures bearing the sun symbol of the Church of Light. The journal's owner had been researching paradox energies and their connection to a curse that inverted life forces. Kazuki couldn't read the details, but the diagrams of magical flows looked disturbingly similar to what happened when he used lethal touch. He tucked the journal into his pack alongside the map. The cloak he kept on, its sound-muffling properties might save his life. A hidden passage behind the artifact recess led upward. Kazuki followed it, emerging into daylight at the base of a hill far from the ravine where he'd entered the cave. The forest here was thinner, with sunlight filtering through autumn leaves. For a moment, he thought he'd escaped. The brand of heresy's pain had dulled to a background throb. He adjusted the cloak, feeling almost hopeful. Maybe he could find a safe place to rest, to study the journal properly. The dagger took him completely by surprise. It flashed through the air with deadly precision, not aimed at his body but at his cloak. The blade pinned the gray fabric to a tree trunk beside him, jerking him to a halt. Kazuki froze, his heart leaping into his throat. One wrong move could tear the cloak, or worse, if the dagger had been aimed differently, it would have found his flesh. From the shadows of an oak tree stepped a woman. She moved with the silence of a predator, her leather armor dyed forest green and brown. A second dagger rested casually in her hand. Her eyes were the color of winter sky, and they held no warmth as they studied him. "Interesting cloak," she said, her voice low and measured. "Ancient make. Stolen from a tomb, maybe?" Kazuki didn't answer. He was calculating distances, escape routes. The woman, Elara, though he didn't know her name yet, stood between him and the densest part of the forest. Her stance was relaxed but ready, the dagger held in a grip that spoke of long practice. "That brand on your hand," she continued, her eyes dropping to the glowing mark. "Church of Light doesn't brand petty thieves. What are you, heretic?" She took a step closer. Kazuki's hand twitched, ready to activate lethal touch, if she came within range. But she stopped just outside, her gaze sharpening as she noticed the tension in his body. "Don't try anything foolish," Elara said softly. "I've been tracking you since you crossed the ravine. Saw you deal with those paladins. Saw you disappear into that cave." Her head tilted slightly. "What did you find in there, besides a dead golem and fancy clothes?" Kazuki remained silent, his mind racing. Rogue class, judging by her equipment and stealth. Hostile or opportunistic? She hadn't killed him outright, which meant she wanted something. Information? The journal? Or was she working for the church? Elara's expression didn't change, but her grip on the dagger tightened just enough to be noticeable. "Last chance to talk before I decide you're more trouble than you're worth." Around them, the forest held its breath. A leaf drifted down between them, turning slowly in the still air. Somewhere distant, a bird called, a normal sound in a world that had become anything but normal for Kazuki. He met her cold gaze and prepared for whatever came next. Elara's second dagger gleamed in the dappled forest light, its edge aimed at Kazuki's throat. She advanced with the fluid grace of a predator, her eyes narrowed to slits of cold suspicion. The rogue's leather armor creaked softly as she shifted her weight, every movement economical and lethal. "That mark on your hand," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "The brand of heresy. Only church spies carry it willingly, or fools who've been caught. Which are you?" Kazuki raised his hands slowly, palms outward. The brand pulsed with a dull, aching warmth, draining his stamina even as he stood motionless. His mind raced, calculating distances. 5 feet between them. Elara could close that gap before he could activate ethereal dodge, and his MP sat at a precarious 15, enough for one skill, maybe 2 if he pushed it. "I'm neither," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "It's a curse. My healing magic, it doesn't work like normal healing." Elara's lips twisted into a sneer. "A convenient story. The church brands heretics to track them. Your bait, leading more of those holy knights right to." Her words cut off as Kazuki's, perception overdrive, flared to life without conscious command. The world sharpened into painful clarity. Distant birdsong resolved into individual notes. The rustle of leaves became a map of air currents. And there, 200 yards northeast, the distinctive twang of a bowstring releasing. Time seemed to stretch. Kazuki saw the arrow's trajectory as a ghostly line painted across his enhanced senses. It wasn't aimed at him. It was arcing toward Elara's exposed back, fired from beyond the tree line where sunlight glinted off polished armor. A patrol. The paladins had found them. "Down," he shouted, lunging forward. Elara reacted instinctively, starting to pivot toward the threat, but Kazuki was already moving. He shoved her shoulder hard, sending her stumbling sideways into a thicket of ferns. As he followed through with the motion, the arrow whispered past his left arm. Fabric tore. A searing line of heat traced across his sleeve where the arrowhead grazed the cloth. Kazuki froze, heart hammering against his ribs. The tear in his sleeve revealed pale skin beneath, unbroken, but so close. A millimeter deeper and the arrow would have pierced flesh. A single point of damage. Death. His breath caught in his throat, the reality of his fragility crashing over him like icy water. He dropped to one knee, pressing his hand against the ground to steady himself. The forest spun around him. Perception overdrive continued to feed him information, the crunch of boots on dry leaves, the jingle of chainmail, the muttered prayers of approaching holy warriors. His MP ticked down, 14. 13. Elara rose from the ferns, a dagger in each hand now. She stared at the torn sleeve, then at Kazuki's ashen face. Understanding dawned in her eyes, sharp and sudden. You pushed me out of the way, she said, her voice losing its edge. Why? They would have killed you, Kazuki managed between shallow breaths. He deactivated perception overdrive, the world blurring back to normal as his MP stabilized at 12. The brand on his hand throbbed in time with his heartbeat. Elara sheathed one dagger and offered a hand. Her fingers were calloused but surprisingly gentle as she helped him to his feet. You're not with them. No. I'm running from them. Distant shouts echoed through the trees. The patrol was closing in, their holy relics tracking pulse a tangible pressure against Kazuki's brand. This way, Elara said, her decision made. Quickly. She moved with silent purpose, leading him through a maze of ancient oaks and moss-covered stones. Kazuki followed, his agility boost, allowing him to match her pace despite his fatigue. They ducked under low branches, leaped across a narrow stream, and finally slipped behind a curtain of hanging vines that concealed a narrow crevice in a rocky outcrop. Inside, the air cooled significantly. Elara's hidden camp was little more than a shallow cave, but it had been made livable. A bedroll lay neatly folded against one wall. A small fire pit held cold ashes. Various pouches and tools hung from pegs driven into the stone. They won't find this place, Elara said, leaning against the cave entrance to peer through the vines. The rock interferes with tracking magic. You're safe for now. Kazuki sank onto a flat stone, examining the tear in his sleeve more closely. The fabric was cleanly sliced, but his skin remained untouched. He let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Thank you, Elara said quietly. She didn't look at him, her attention still on the forest outside. For what you did back there. You would have done the same. Would I? She turned, her expression unreadable. I don't know you. You don't know me. Yet you risked, whatever it is you risked. That arrow nearly hit you. Kazuki met her gaze. It did hit me. The fabric, anyway. If it had been a fraction of an inch deeper. He trailed off, unable to voice the consequence. Elara studied him for a long moment. Show me. Show you what? This curse of yours. You said your healing doesn't work normally. Kazuki hesitated. Trust was a dangerous commodity in this world, but Elara had just spared his life twice, first by not killing him when she had the chance, then by leading him to safety. He nodded slowly. They waited until dusk, when the forest grew quiet and the patrol's search had moved westward. Elara produced a captured rabbit from a snare line she maintained nearby, a plump creature with brown fur and frightened eyes. Don't make me regret this, she warned as she held the struggling animal. Kazuki focused. Lethal touch, required minimal MP, just 10 points, but he had to be careful. His reserve sat at 12, recovered slowly through rest. He extended a hand, palm glowing with the familiar golden light that should have been healing energy. The rabbit went still as his fingers brushed its fur. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the light intensified, turning from gold to blinding white. The animal convulsed once, its eyes widening before going dull. Where Kazuki's hand made contact, the fur blackened and crumbled to ash. The effect spread rapidly, consuming the creature from the inside out until nothing remained but a small pile of gray dust on the forest floor. Elara stared at the ashes, then at Kazuki's hand. The brand on his palm seemed to pulse in response to the expended magic. Gods above, she whispered. That's not healing. It's the opposite, Kazuki said, his voice hollow. My touch doesn't mend. It unmakes. And I. He pulled back his sleeve, showing the unmarked skin beneath. One hit. That's all it would take. Any attack, any injury. I die. Understanding settled over Elara's features. A glass cannon. All power, no defense. Exactly. She paced the small clearing, her boots whispering through fallen leaves. The church hunts anomalies. Things that don't fit their perfect world. Your magic, it's the ultimate anomaly. And you? Kazuki asked. Why are they after you? Elara's smile was bitter. I stole from them. A relic from one of their outposts, a focusing crystal that amplifies holy magic. They want it back. More importantly, they want me dead as an example. She stopped pacing and faced him. We have a common enemy. What are you suggesting? An alliance. Temporary. I protect your body, keep things from touching you. You use that, whatever it is, against the church when they find us. And they will find us. They always do. Kazuki considered. Alone, he was constantly one mistake away from death. With Alara's stealth and combat skills, his chances improved dramatically. But trust was still a razor's edge. Why would you help me? He asked. You could just take what supplies I have and disappear. Because I've seen what the church does to people like us, Alara said, her voice dropping. They don't just kill heretics. They make examples of them. Public purifications that last for days. I'd rather take my chances with a cursed healer than end up on one of their pyres. She extended a hand, not in offering, but in demonstration. Her palm bore a faint, silvery scar in the shape of a sunburst, old, but unmistakably a brand that had been removed through painful means. I was one of theirs once, she said softly. A novice in their order. Until I asked too many questions about where their relics really come from. This. She gestured to the scar. Was my answer. Kazuki looked from her scar to his own brand. Two marked people in a world that wanted them erased. He nodded slowly. An alliance, then. Until we're both safe. Until we're both safe, Alara agreed. They spent the next hour planning. Alara knew the region well, the safe routes, the church patrol patterns, the locations of abandoned shelters. Kazuki shared what he'd learned from the ancient journal and murals, speaking of the paradox bearer and the confrontation with the demon lord. Legends, Alara murmured when he finished. Children's tales to scare novices into obedience. But if there's truth to them. She trailed off, her eyes distant. Then maybe there's a way to survive this, Kazuki finished for her. As twilight deepened into proper night, they settled back into the hidden camp. Alara took first watch, positioning herself at the cave entrance where she could see the moonlit forest. Kazuki tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind replayed the arrow's near miss, the feel of fabric tearing instead of skin. The rabbit turning to ash beneath his touch. He was drifting into uneasy half-sleep when a flicker of movement caught his eye through the vine curtain. Not Alara, she sat motionless at her post. This was higher up, in the branches of an ancient oak that overlooked their hiding place. Kazuki sat up slowly, his perception overdrive activating on instinct. MP drained, 11. 10. The world sharpened. He saw it clearly now, a figure cloaked in shadows, perched on a thick branch 30 yards away. The man held something in his hands, a crystal orb that glowed with soft, malevolent light. As Kazuki watched, the figure raised the orb, and within its depths, an image formed, a perfect miniature of their hidden camp, with two tiny figures visible inside. The figure smiled, a cold expression just visible beneath his hood. He whispered words too faint for even enhanced hearing to catch, and the orb's glow pulsed once, twice, before fading. Then he was gone, melting back into the shadows as if he'd never been there at all. Kazuki's blood ran cold. He opened his mouth to warn Alara, but she was already turning, her eyes wide with dawning horror. She'd seen it too. Inquisitor, she breathed, the word carrying more fear than Kazuki had heard from her yet. They've sent an Inquisitor. Outside their sanctuary, the forest had gone completely silent. Not even the insects chirped. The night held its breath, waiting for the hunt to begin anew. The city walls of Viridia rose like jagged teeth against the twilight sky, their gray stone stained with centuries of rain and smoke. Kazuki pulled the sound-muffling cloak tighter around his shoulders, the fabric whispering against his skin as he adjusted the hood to better conceal his face. Beneath the wool, the brand of heresy pulsed with a dull, persistent ache, draining his stamina like a slow leak in a wineskin. Alara moved beside him with the silent grace of a shadow, her leather armor blending with the gathering dusk. "Keep your head down," she murmured, her eyes scanning the crowded gate ahead. The guards check for brands at sunset. Kazuki's breath hitched as they joined the queue of merchants, travelers, and laborers returning home. The air smelled of roasted meat, dung, and the metallic tang of the nearby forges. His 1 HP body felt impossibly fragile amidst the jostling crowd, a single misplaced elbow, a stumble against cobblestones, and it would all end. He activated agility boost, the passive skill flowing through his muscles like liquid awareness, making every movement precise and controlled. Papers? A guard with a bored expression held out a gloved hand. Elara produced 2 forged identity scrolls from her belt pouch. Merchant's apprentice and his guard, she said smoothly. Here to purchase rare herbs in the market district. The guard's eyes lingered on Kazuki's hooded face. Lower your hood. Kazuki's heart hammered against his ribs. He could feel the brand's heat through the cloth. Slowly, he reached up, fingers trembling. Oi! Thief at the west gate, someone shouted further down the wall. The guard cursed and waved them through without another glance. Inside, Viridia unfolded in a chaotic tapestry of noise and movement. Stone buildings leaned against one another like drunken comrades, their upper stories connected by wooden walkways that creaked underfoot. Lanterns flickered to life in the gathering dark, casting long, dancing shadows across the cobblestones. Kazuki's perception overdrive threatened to activate on its own. His senses screamed at the overload of information, the clatter of cart wheels, the barked arguments from tavern doors, the scent of unwashed bodies and cheap perfume. Don't, Elara said quietly, placing a hand on his arm. Save your MP. The library's in the Warrens. They moved through narrower streets where the buildings pressed so close together that only a sliver of violet sky remained visible overhead. The sounds changed here, less commerce, more whispered conversations from shadowed doorways, the scrape of metal on stone from unseen alleys. Kazuki's cloak proved its worth, muffling his footsteps until he moved like a ghost through the gloom. The Black Market Library occupied what appeared to be a collapsed brewery. Elara led him through a broken cellar door, down moss-slick steps into a cavernous space where shelves had been cobbled together from driftwood and salvaged planks. Books lay in haphazard piles, their pages yellowed with age. A single oil lamp burned on a central table, illuminating a wizened man with ink-stained fingers. Elara, the man said without looking up from his tome. I told you not to return. The church has doubled their bounty. We need information on paradox vitality, she said, placing a small pouch of silver coins on the table. The man's eyes flicked to Kazuki. That's a death sentence to even ask about. The church purged all records after the last purge. You kept copies, Elara insisted. You keep copies of everything. With a sigh, the old man rose and shuffled to a shelf near the back. He returned with a leather-bound volume so ancient its cover had fused shut. This mentions it in passing. A healer's curse from the Age of Sundering. Those touched by it could reverse life and death, but at the cost of their own fragility. Most were hunted down by the church's precursors. Kazuki's hands shook as he took the book. The pages crackled like autumn leaves as he turned them. There, in faded script, were the words he'd seen in the cave murals, the paradox bearer shall face the demon lord's wrath, for only through absolute fragility can absolute power be wielded. A floorboard creaked overhead. Elara's daggers appeared in her hands. We have company. The cellar door burst open. A city guard in polished breastplate stood silhouetted against the twilight, his eyes widening as they landed on Elara. Rogue! I knew I recognized that walk. He raised a horn to his lips and blew a single, piercing note. Chaos erupted. Kazuki shoved the book into his cloak as Elara threw a dagger that embedded itself in the guard's shoulder. They burst back into the street just as answering horns echoed from multiple directions. The Warrens, moments ago a maze of shadows, now teemed with guards pouring from side streets. Main thoroughfare. Elara shouted, already running. Lose them in the crowd. Kazuki activated agility boost to its fullest extent. The world sharpened into crystalline clarity. He could see the individual threads in a merchant's cloak, count the droplets of sweat on a running guard's brow, calculate the exact angle needed to slip between two colliding carts. He moved like water through the panicking civilians, his cloak billowing behind him as he dodged grasping hands and stumbling bodies. Elara kept pace, her daggers finding targets with brutal efficiency. A guard lunged with a short sword, she deflected it with a cross-blade parry and kicked him into a fruit stall. Apples scattered across the cobblestones like crimson marbles. Left. Kazuki shouted, his enhanced perception spotting an opening. They turned into a wider street where evening market stalls were being hastily abandoned. The scent of spilled wine and trampled herbs filled the air. Ahead, a squad of 6 guards formed a shield wall, their spears leveled. From a second-story window, a figure in mage's robes raised hands glowing with crimson light. Area spell. Elara warned. Kazuki didn't hesitate. He activated ethereal dodge, feeling 15 MP drain from his already depleted reserves. The world blurred into shades of gray as his body phased partially out of reality. The mage's spell, a wave of concussive force, passed through him like a ghost through a wall. Behind him, market stalls shattered into splinters, and 2 guards were thrown backward against a stone wall. The effort left Kazuki gasping, his MP now at 5/50. The fatigued debuff returned with vengeance, making his limbs feel like lead. Sewer grate. Elara pointed to a rusted iron cover near the gutter. Together, they pried it open as arrows began to thud into the cobblestones around them. Kazuki dropped into darkness first, the fall jarring his fragile body. Elara followed, pulling the grate closed above them just as a guard's face appeared in the opening. The stench hit Kazuki like a physical blow, decay, waste, and the damp, earthy smell of stone long submerged. They stood in ankle-deep water that flowed sluggishly through a brick tunnel. Dim phosphorescent fungi clung to the walls, providing just enough sickly green light to see by. Elara lit a small lantern from her pack. They won't follow us down here. The city guard considers the sewers cursed. Kazuki leaned against the damp wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The book. Later, Elara said, her own breathing only slightly elevated. First, we need to find a way out that isn't being watched. They moved through the labyrinthine tunnels, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. After 20 minutes of twisting turns, they found a small dry alcove where the sewer branched. There, half submerged in the water, floated a leather-bound ledger. Elara fished it out with the tip of her dagger. The pages were coded in some complex cipher, but certain phrases stood out clearly: anomaly purification protocol, termination of paradox bearers, demon lord convergence theory. They're not just hunting heretics, Kazuki whispered, his blood running cold. They're systematically eliminating anyone with abilities that don't fit their doctrine. They think we're connected to the demon lord's return. Elara's eyes narrowed as she flipped through more pages. This mentioned scheduled purges in 3 other cities. They're using the heresy hunts as cover for something bigger. A sound echoed from further down the tunnel. Sloshing footsteps. Not human footsteps, something with multiple, irregular impacts against the water. Kazuki activated perception overdrive, the last of his MP draining away. The enhanced senses revealed what the gloom concealed: shapes moving in the water, larger than dogs, their bodies distorted and misshapen. Glowing red eyes blinked open in the darkness, 1 pair, then 3, then a dozen. They emerged from the deeper water, rats, but twisted by some alchemical corruption, their fur matted with sewage, teeth grown into yellowed tusks, muscles bulging beneath scarred flesh. The lead rat hissed, revealing a mouth filled with needle-sharp teeth. The glowing eyes fixed on Kazuki with unnatural intelligence. Elara's daggers gleamed in the lantern light. Back to back. Don't let them touch you. Kazuki's hand went to his chest, where the brand pulsed in time with his racing heart. He had no MP left for ethereal dodge. No energy for anything but the most basic movements. The mutated rats advanced, their sloshing footsteps now a chorus of impending violence in the dripping dark. The first mutant rat lunged with a guttural hiss, its fangs glistening with sewer filth. Kazuki's body moved before his mind could process the threat, a sideways twist that sent him stumbling against the damp brick wall. The creature's jaws snapped shut on empty air inches from his face, the rush of foul breath making his eyes water. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat a frantic reminder of the single point of life sustaining him. Left. Elara's voice cut through the splashing water as 2 more rats emerged from the murky flow, their red eyes casting eerie reflections on the tunnel walls. They were larger than any dog Kazuki had seen in his previous life, muscles rippling beneath matted fur that smelled of rot and stagnant water. Kazuki activated perception overdrive, the world sharpening into painful clarity. He could see individual droplets of water clinging to the rats' whiskers, the minute twitch of their haunches before they sprang. His MP dropped from 5 to 4, the drain feeling like a physical weight settling behind his eyes. The brand of heresy on his forearm pulsed with dull heat, sapping what little stamina remained after their frantic escape through Viridia streets. Don't let them surround us. Elara drew twin daggers from her belt, her movements economical and precise. They hunt in packs. Kazuki's fingers tingled with the familiar energy of lethal touch. He calculated the MP cost, 10 per cast, with only 4 remaining. 1 shot, maybe 2 if he pushed himself to the edge of consciousness. The rats numbered at least 6, their forms shifting in the dim light filtering through distant grates. The largest rat charged, its claws scraping against stone. Kazuki met it with an open palm, the reversed healing energy surging through his arm. The contact lasted less than a second, but the effect was immediate and horrifying. The creature's flesh turned to gray ash from the point of contact outward, its momentum carrying the disintegrating body forward in a cloud of particulate matter that settled on the sewer water like dirty snow. No sound escaped its throat, just the whisper of annihilation. MP 0/50. The world swam. Kazuki's vision blurred at the edges, the fatigued debuff intensifying to a bone-deep exhaustion that made his limbs feel like lead. He staggered, catching himself against the wall as black spots danced before his eyes. The remaining rats hesitated, their animal instincts recognizing the unnatural death of their packmate. Smoke. Ilara's voice came from somewhere to his right. A small ceramic sphere shattered at her feet, billowing gray smoke that filled the tunnel with acrid chemical scent. The rats recoiled, their glowing eyes blinking in confusion. Kazuki forced himself to focus through the MP depletion. His breathing came in ragged gasps, each inhalation tasting of sewage and ozone from his expended magic. He could feel the brand of heresy burning hotter now, as if feeding on his weakness. The coded ledger in his satchel felt impossibly heavy, a physical manifestation of the conspiracy they'd uncovered. "They're regrouping," Ilara whispered, materializing beside him like a shadow. Her face was pale in the gloom, sweat tracing lines through the grime on her cheeks. "Can you move?" Kazuki nodded, though the motion sent fresh waves of dizziness through him. "Need a moment." "We don't have moments." She pressed a hand against his back, steadying him. Her touch was surprisingly gentle for someone who tried to kill him just days before. "The smoke won't last." As if on cue, the largest remaining rat, a beast with one ear torn and scars crisscrossing its muzzle, let out a chittering cry. The others responded, fanning out to flank them. Kazuki counted 5 sets of glowing eyes through the thinning smoke. "Distract them," he managed through gritted teeth. "I need line of sight." Ilara didn't question him. She moved with the fluid grace of her rogue class, daggers flashing as she feinted toward the leftmost rat. The creature lunged, and she danced back, drawing 2 more after her with a thrown stone that clattered against the far wall. Her movements were a blur of controlled violence, each dodge calculated to keep the rat's attention divided. Kazuki focused on the scarred leader. With no MP left for perception overdrive, he had to rely on his natural senses, heightened by weeks of survival in this hostile world. He could hear the rat's breathing, wet and labored. See the way it favored its right forepaw. Smell the infection festering in one of its wounds. Weak spots. The realization came with crystalline clarity. These weren't mindless monsters, they were living creatures with injuries, vulnerabilities. And where there was injury, lethal touch could find purchase. He pushed off from the wall, ignoring the protest of his exhausted muscles. The rat turned toward him, jaws gaping. Kazuki didn't try to strike the heavily muscled body. Instead, he dropped into a low slide through the shallow water, his hand shooting upward to brush against the infected wound on the creature's flank. The effect was slower this time, perhaps because of his depleted state. The flesh around the wound blackened and crumbled, the necrosis spreading like ink in water. The rat screamed, a high, piercing sound that echoed through the tunnels. It thrashed, knocking Kazuki aside before collapsing into a heap of rapidly disintegrating tissue. The remaining rats froze, their animal minds unable to comprehend the unnatural deaths of their leaders. In that moment of hesitation, Ilara struck. Her daggers found eyes, throats, the soft spots behind skulls. She moved with lethal efficiency, each strike precise and final. When the last rat fell silent, the only sounds were their labored breathing and the steady drip of water from overhead pipes. Kazuki lay where he'd fallen, the sewer water soaking through his clothes. The cold seeped into his bones, a welcome counterpoint to the brand's persistent heat. He could feel his body trembling, not from fear, but from the absolute depletion of magical energy. His status screen, visible only to him, showed the grim reality. HP, 1/1. MP, 0/50. Status, fatigued, severe, MP depletion, brand of heresy, active. "You're alive," Ilara said, kneeling beside him. She didn't offer a hand up, she knew better than to touch him without warning. Her eyes scanned the tunnel, alert for more threats. That was efficient. Lucky, Kazuki corrected, pushing himself to a sitting position. Water streamed from his hair. If there'd been one more. He didn't finish the thought. They both knew what would have happened. Elara helped him to his feet, her grip careful on his elbow. We need to move. The noise might attract more than rats. They found a dry alcove further along the tunnel, a maintenance recess with a rusted ladder leading upward. Elara lit a small glowstone from her pack, its soft blue light pushing back the darkness just enough to read by. Kazuki retrieved the coded ledger, its pages damp but still legible. The decoding took hours. Elara worked with a focus that bordered on obsession, her fingers tracing the intricate symbols while Kazuki kept watch. His fatigued status made every minute feel like an hour, but he forced himself to remain alert, his ears straining for any sound beyond the constant drip-drip of the sewers. Here, Elara said finally, her voice tight. The church isn't just hunting heretics. They're collecting them. Kazuki moved closer, careful not to touch her. The glowstone illuminated a section of decoded text that made his blood run cold. Asterisk subject 47, female, age 24. Class, elemental mage. Anomaly, can manipulate shadow as element. Captured during purge of Willow Creek. Transferred to research facility Gamma for vivisection, asterisk. Asterisk subject 89, male, age 31. Class, warrior. Anomaly, regenerates lost limbs. Escaped during transport. Terminated with extreme prejudice, asterisk. Page after page documented captures, experiments, dissections. The Church of Light wasn't purging threats, they were harvesting them. Studying them. And at the center of it all, references to a catalyst event tied to the Demon Lord's predicted rise. The anomalies aren't random, Kazuki whispered, his throat dry. They're connected. To the Demon Lord. To, whatever this is. Elara turned a page, her expression grim. There's more. Look. She pointed to a section that detailed something called paradox stabilization theory. The text was technical, filled with terms Kazuki didn't recognize, but the gist was clear. The church believed anomalies like him were manifestations of reality breaking down. And the Demon Lord's return would trigger a cascade failure unless controlled. Controlled meaning dissected, Elara said flatly. She closed the ledger, her knuckles white. We need answers. Real answers. Where? There's a legend. An alchemist who lives in the haunted mountains. They say he knows things about curses that even the church has forgotten. Elara met his eyes. If anyone can tell us about paradox vitality. Kazuki didn't need her to finish. The decision was made in the silence between them, in the shared understanding of hunted things seeking sanctuary. They climbed the rusted ladder as dawn painted the sky in shades of gray and pink. The sewer grate opened into an alley behind a butcher's shop, the smell of blood and sawdust replacing the sewer's stench. Viridia was waking around them, merchants setting up stalls, guards changing shifts. Normalcy that felt like a fragile illusion. Kazuki adjusted his sound-muffling cloak, ensuring the brand remained hidden. The fatigued debuff made every movement an effort, but the prospect of answers, of maybe, just maybe, finding a way to survive this world beyond constant evasion, gave him strength. They were 3 steps into the alley when a figure emerged from the shadows. Not a guard, not a paladin. A child, no more than 10, dressed in rags with eyes too old for his face. He didn't speak, just pressed a folded letter into Kazuki's hand before melting back into the morning gloom. Kazuki stared at the parchment, its surface unmarked except for a wax seal. The symbol pressed into the wax matched the murals he'd seen in the ancient ruins, the same spiraling design that had adorned the control panel he'd used to short-circuit the golem. His fingers trembled as he broke the seal. Inside, a single line of elegant script. Asterisk the alchemist awaits at Moonfall Peak. Follow the silver moss, asterisk. No signature. No explanation. Just directions to the very place they decided to seek. Kazuki looked up, meeting Elara's wary gaze. The morning sun caught the edges of the parchment, illuminating the symbol that seemed to pulse with ancient meaning. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell began to toll. The haunted mountains lived up to their name from the moment Kazuki and Elara left the last scraggly pine behind. Wind screamed through jagged passes like a chorus of the damned, carrying with it the scent of ozone and something colder, the absence of life. Kazuki's breath came in ragged puffs, visible in air that bit through his cloak. Every step upward was a battle against gravity and the persistent drain of the brand of heresy, which gnawed at his stamina like a rat at a rope. Elara moved ahead with the sure-footed grace of a mountain cat, her eyes constantly scanning the gray rock and shifting mist. Stay close, she called back, her voice nearly swallowed by the gale. The paths here are treacherous. One misstep and you'll be a stain on the rocks 1,000 feet below. Kazuki didn't need the warning. His agility boost was a constant hum in his veins, sharpening his reflexes, but it couldn't replenish what the brand stole. His MP pool remained at 0, a hollow ache behind his eyes. He'd been walking on the knife edge of exhaustion since the sewers, each breath a conscious effort. The letter they'd received, directing them to Moonfall Peak, felt heavy in his pocket, its wax seal bearing a symbol that matched the murals in the ancient ruins. Hope was a fragile thing in this place, easily crushed by the next gust of wind. They rounded a bend where the path narrowed to a ledge no wider than his shoulders. To the left, the mountain face rose sheer and dark, to the right, nothing but a drop into swirling mist. Kazuki pressed his back against the stone, feeling its cold seep through his clothes. His heart hammered against his ribs. One slip. One gust strong enough to push him off balance. That was all it would take. His 1 HP was less than a candle flame in this wind. Elara glanced back, her expression grim. Almost through. Then the real fun begins. Beyond the ledge, the path opened into a high valley shrouded in perpetual twilight. The air grew still, unnaturally so. The wind's howl faded to a whisper, then to silence. It was the silence that set Kazuki's teeth on edge. No birds called. No insects chirped. Only the crunch of their boots on frost-rimed gravel. Then the wraiths came. They drifted from the rock itself, translucent forms that shimmered like heat haze. There were 3 of them, humanoid but featureless, with elongated limbs that ended in wispy tendrils. They made no sound, but the air around them grew cold enough to make Kazuki's breath crystallize. Spectral wraiths, semi-living entities that phased through solid matter. Elara knocked an arrow, the tip glowing with a faint blue enchantment. Don't let them touch you. Their chill can freeze your soul. Kazuki's mind raced. Lethal touch, required contact, but these things were barely solid. Could his reversed healing affect something that was only half alive? He had no MP left for ethereal dodge, or perception overdrive. He was down to his base agility and the desperate hope that Elara's arrows would be enough. The first wraith drifted toward him, its form rippling. Kazuki dodged to the side, his movements fueled by adrenaline and agility boost. The wraith passed through the space he'd occupied, and the cold of its passage washed over him like a wave of ice water. It wasn't a physical touch, but the proximity alone sapped his strength. The brand of heresy flared on his chest, its stamina drain intensifying. He stumbled, his vision blurring at the edges. Elara's arrow sang through the air, striking the wraith in what might have been its chest. The enchanted tip flared, and the wraith shuddered, its form becoming more opaque. They're vulnerable to wholly infused attacks, she shouted. But I only have a few of these arrows left. Another wraith targeted Kazuki, gliding through a boulder as if it were smoke. This time, he couldn't dodge fast enough. It passed through him. The cold was absolute. It wasn't just the chill of winter, it was the cold of the grave, seeping into his bones, his blood, his very soul. Kazuki gasped, his knees buckling. The stamina drain from the brand became a torrent, pulling him toward unconsciousness. He could feel his life force, already paper-thin, wavering. His 1 HP wasn't just a number now, it was a thread stretched to breaking. The wraith's touch didn't deal damage in the conventional sense, but it eroded his endurance, his will to keep moving. Elara fired again, her arrow striking the wraith that had passed through Kazuki. It recoiled, its form flickering. Kazuki! Get up! He forced himself to his feet, every muscle protesting. The third wraith was almost upon him. Think. He had no MP. But, lethal touch, didn't require MP, it was always active, a part of his curse. If the wraiths were semi-living, maybe his touch would still work. It was a desperate gamble. As the wraith reached for him with wispy tendrils, Kazuki didn't dodge. Instead, he lunged forward, his hand outstretched. His fingers brushed against the wraith's insubstantial form. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wraith convulsed. A sound like shattering glass filled the air as its translucent body fractured into 1,000 glittering shards that dissolved into mist. Kazuki's hand tingled with residual energy. It had worked. Lethal touch could kill them, but it required direct contact, a dangerous proposition when each touch drained his stamina to near collapse. Elara took down the second wraith with another enchanted arrow, leaving only the first, now weakened from her initial shot. Kazuki moved, his body screaming in protest. He feinted left, then darted right, his agility the only thing keeping him ahead of the wraith's chilling grasp. With a final burst of speed, he slapped his palm against its shimmering chest. The wraith dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only a lingering cold and the acrid smell of ozone. Silence returned, deeper than before. Kazuki slumped against a rock, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The stamina drain from the brand and the wraith's touch had left him trembling. Elara hurried to his side, her face etched with concern. "You're burning through your reserves faster than a candle in a storm. We need to find this alchemist before you collapse entirely." He nodded, unable to speak. The path ahead led upward, toward a distant peak where ancient stone structures clung to the cliffs like lichen. Moonfall Peak. The journey there was a blur of pain and determination. They crossed narrow bridges of petrified wood, scrambled up slopes of loose scree, and navigated through fields of jagged crystals that hummed with latent magic. Kazuki's world narrowed to the next step, the next breath. The brand on his chest was a constant, gnawing presence, a reminder that even if he survived the mountains, the church was still out there, hunting. Dusk was bleeding the last light from the sky when they reached the monastery. It was built into the cliff face, its walls carved from the living rock. Archways opened to empty air, and delicate spires rose against the bruised purple of twilight. No lights shone within, but the heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar. Elara pushed it open, her dagger held low. The interior was a single large chamber, dominated by a circular pool of still water in the center. Shelves lined the walls, filled with dusty scrolls, strange crystals, and glass vials containing liquids that glowed with soft inner light. The air smelled of herbs, ozone, and age. An elderly elf woman emerged from the shadows. She moved with a grace that belied her apparent years, her silver hair braided with feathers and small bones. Her eyes, the color of weathered jade, studied them with a wariness that spoke of long isolation. This was Lyra, the alchemist. "You are tracked," she said, her voice like dry leaves rustling. "The brand you bear sings to the stones. It has drawn the hungry things to you." Kazuki straightened, forcing himself to stand tall despite the fatigue. "We were told you might have answers. About this." He pulled aside his cloak, revealing the brand of heresy on his chest. Lyra's eyes narrowed. She approached, her movements fluid. Her fingers, cold and delicate, traced the edges of the brand without touching it. Kazuki flinched, expecting pain, but there was only a faint tingling. "A mark of the church," she murmured. "But it is not the brand that interests me. It is what lies beneath. Show me your skill." Kazuki hesitated. Then he held out his hand, palm up. He focused, and a faint golden light, the color of healing magic, flickered across his skin. It was the visual cue for lethal touch, though the power itself was always active. Lyra's breath caught. She took a step back, her expression shifting from wariness to something akin to awe and pity. "Paradox vitality. I had thought it only a legend. A curse from a time when gods walked this world and fell in battle. What do you know about it?" Elara asked, her voice tight. Lyra turned to a shelf, retrieving a scroll so ancient the edges crumbled at her touch. She unrolled it carefully, revealing intricate illustrations of a being of light and shadow locked in combat. Long ago, before the Church of Light rose to power, there was a war between the gods of creation and the void. One of the healing deities, in a final act of defiance against the coming darkness, crafted a curse. It was meant to be a weapon, a way to turn life against the unliving, to heal so profoundly it became destruction. This curse was paradox vitality. It was designed to counter the immortality of the demon lord, should he ever rise again. Kazuki's mind reeled. A weapon. A curse meant to fight the ultimate evil. Then why does it leave me with 1 HP? Why does it mark me as a heretic? Because the curse was never meant for mortal hands, Lyra said softly. It was a divine weapon, requiring a divine vessel. In a mortal, it becomes a paradox in truth. You heal others to death because your body cannot contain the power's true purpose. Your single point of health is not a weakness, it is the strain of holding a god's weapon in a human frame. The church brands you because they fear what they do not understand, and because their doctrine cannot allow for powers that come from fallen gods. Elara's grip tightened on her dagger. Can it be removed? Controlled? Lyra shook her head. The curse is woven into your soul. To remove it would be to unmake you. But there may be ways to mitigate its effects. To strengthen your vessel so the strain does not, she trailed off, her eyes fixed on Kazuki with sudden intensity. You have used it often. I had to survive, Kazuki said, the words tasting of ash. Each use erodes the boundaries between your soul and the curse, Lyra warned. The power is not meant to be wielded lightly. It consumes not just your enemies, but pieces of you. Your memories, your emotions, your very sense of self. Use it too much, and you may become nothing but a vessel for the curse, a hollow weapon with no will of your own. The weight of her words settled in the room, heavier than the mountain stone around them. Kazuki thought of the goblin turned to ash, the mutant rats in the sewers, the wraiths on the path. Each death had left a mark on him, not physically, but in the quiet moments when he wondered if he was still human. Was that the erosion Lyra spoke of? He was about to ask more when the monastery shook. It started as a low rumble, deep in the rock. Dust sifted from the ceiling. The still water in the pool rippled, concentric circles spreading outward. Then the entire wall to their right exploded inward in a shower of stone and splintered wood. Through the gaping hole loomed a colossal figure of carved stone, twice the height of a man. Its body was a patchwork of granite and crystal, with glowing runes etched across its chest. It had no face, only a smooth oval where one should be, but it turned toward them with deliberate menace. One massive fist, larger than Kazuki's entire body, clenched as it took a step forward. The floor trembled. Lyra's eyes widened in alarm. The Guardian. It sleeps beneath the monastery, awakened by the resonance of your curse. It will not stop until you are dead or it is destroyed. The Stone Guardian raised its fist, ready to strike. The Stone Guardian's hammer descended with the weight of a falling mountain. Kazuki's world narrowed to the space between life and death, a gap measured in inches and heartbeats. He threw himself sideways, the agility boost, passive humming through his veins like a second pulse, but his body screamed in protest. The hammer struck the monastery's ancient stone floor with a thunderous crack, sending spiderwebs of fractures radiating outward. Chunks of rock erupted into the air, pelting Kazuki's back as he rolled. Dust filled the chamber, stinging his eyes and coating his tongue with the taste of crushed minerals. Kazuki scrambled to his feet, his lungs burning. The Guardian stood 12 feet tall, its body carved from dark granite that shimmered with embedded magic runes. Its face was a smooth, featureless oval save for two glowing blue eyes that tracked his every movement. The hammer it wielded was nearly as large as Kazuki himself, the head etched with swirling patterns that pulsed with restrained power. It's immune to your touch. Lyra's voice cut through the dust cloud from where she stood near a shattered alchemy table. The elderly elf moved with surprising speed, her hands already sorting through vials and ingredients. The runes on its surface absorb healing magic, your paradox vitality would only empower it further. Ilara materialized from the shadows near the broken wall, two throwing daggers already spinning in her hands. Then how do we stop it? She demanded, her eyes never leaving the Guardian as it raised its hammer for another swing. Evasion and exhaustion, Lyra said grimly. It's powered by a magic core. If we can overload it. She trailed off as the Guardian took a ground-shaking step forward. Kazuki's mind raced even as his body moved. His MP gauge remained stubbornly at 0/50, the emptiness in his magical reserves a constant, gnawing void. The fatigued debuff made every movement feel like wading through thick mud, and the brand of heresy on his chest pulsed with a steady drain that sapped what little stamina he had left. But he had trained for this, countless hours in dark forests and abandoned ruins, pushing his agility to supernatural levels just to survive another day. The Guardian's hammer came around in a sweeping horizontal arc. Kazuki didn't think, he reacted. Perception overdrive, activated automatically, the 5 MP per minute cost irrelevant when he had nothing left to spend. The world sharpened into impossible clarity. He could see individual dust motes suspended in the air, the minute flex of the Guardian's stone joints, the exact trajectory of the hammer's path. Time seemed to slow, but his body couldn't match his perception. He dropped to the floor, the hammer passing so close overhead that the displaced air tore at his hair and clothes. Kazuki, left. Ilara shouted. He rolled as the Guardian's massive foot stomped down where his head had been a second before. The impact sent him skidding across the floor, his back scraping against rough stone. Pain flared, not from injury, but from the sheer strain on muscles pushed beyond their limits. He came up in a crouch, breathing ragged. Ilara's daggers flashed through the air, striking the Guardian's chest with metallic pings. They bounced off harmlessly, leaving not even scratches on the enchanted stone. The Guardian ignored her entirely, its glowing eyes fixed on Kazuki as if recognizing the greater threat. It's targeting the anomaly, Lyra muttered, her hands moving in a blur as she mixed ingredients in a ceramic bowl. The curse in your blood calls to it. Another hammer swing, this time an overhead smash. Kazuki pushed off with his legs, his muscles screaming in protest as he launched himself backward. The hammer cratered the floor where he'd stood, sending another shockwave through the chamber. Cracks raced up the walls, and part of the ceiling groaned ominously. He needed MP. Just enough for one ethereal dodge, 15 points that might as well have been a million. His mind calculated distances, angles, probabilities. The Guardian wasn't fast, but its attacks covered enormous areas, and the confined space of the monastery chamber left little room for error. One graze from that hammer, one misstep that sent him stumbling into its stone body, and his single HP would vanish. Elara, the runes on its back. Lyra called out, not looking up from her work. There's a pattern, look for the one that doesn't glow. Elara darted around the Guardian's flank, her movements a blur of practiced grace. The Guardian turned to track her, its hammer rising again. Kazuki saw his opening, a fraction of a second where the creature's attention was divided. He sprinted forward, his feet barely touching the ground as he closed the distance. The Guardian sensed him at the last moment, twisting with impossible speed for something made of stone. Its free hand, a massive stone fist, swung around in a backhand that would have shattered every bone in Kazuki's body. He had no MP4 ethereal dodge. No magical escape. Only training and desperation. He dropped into a slide, the rough stone tearing at his clothes as he passed beneath the swinging fist. The Guardian's hammer came down in the space he just vacated, the impact so close that Kazuki felt the vibration in his teeth. He came up behind the creature, his eyes scanning the runes etched across its broad back. Elara was already there, pointing at a section near the Guardian's shoulder blade. There. It's darker than the others. Kazuki saw it, a rune shaped like a spiraling vortex, its lines filled with shadow instead of the blue glow that illuminated the others. But reaching it meant getting close enough to touch, and the Guardian was already turning, its hammer coming around in another devastating arc. Kazuki, catch. Lyra's voice cut through the chaos. A small vial sailed through the air. Kazuki snatched it without thinking, his fingers closing around the cool glass. Inside swirled a liquid the color of storm clouds, flecked with silver particles that danced like captured starlight. Drink it now. Lyra commanded. It'll boost your agility, but it'll burn through what little stamina you have left. No time for questions. No time for hesitation. Kazuki pulled the stopper with his teeth and downed the contents in one gulp. The potion tasted of lightning and ozone, burning its way down his throat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world exploded into motion. His body lightened, the fatigue melting away replaced by a buzzing, electric energy. The fatigued, debuff didn't disappear, he could still feel its weight lurking at the edges of his consciousness, but for now, it was pushed back, overridden by the potion's artificial vigor. He moved, and the air seemed to part before him, offering no resistance. The Guardian's hammer swung. Kazuki didn't dodge, he flowed around it, his body bending in ways that should have been impossible. He became a ghost in the dust-filled air, a phantom that the stone giant couldn't quite grasp. Each near miss became a calculated risk, each evasion a step in a deadly dance he'd been practicing since the day he woke in this world with a curse for a blessing. But the potion came with a price. With every movement, he could feel his stamina draining faster, the brand of heresy pulsing in time with his racing heart. The temporary boost was burning through his reserves like a wildfire through dry grass. He had minutes at best before he collapsed. Elara, distract it. Kazuki shouted, his voice strained. The rogue didn't hesitate. She threw her remaining daggers not at the Guardian's body, but at its glowing eyes. The blade struck true, shattering against the magical orbs with bursts of blue light. The Guardian staggered, momentarily blinded, its hammer swinging wildly. Kazuki saw his chance. He sprinted up the Guardian's leg, using the runes as handholds, his enhanced agility making the impossible climb look effortless. The stone was cold and rough beneath his fingers, vibrating with the magic that animated the construct. He reached the shoulder blade, his fingers finding the dark rune. Now came the dangerous part. Lethal touch, wouldn't work, Lyra had said it would only empower the Guardian. But the rune itself was a vulnerability, a flaw in the magical matrix. Kazuki focused, reaching for the well of power that usually fueled his reversed healing. Empty. Completely drained. He had nothing left to give. No MP to cast even the simplest spell. But as his hand pressed against the dark rune, he felt something, a resonance. The curse in his blood, the paradox vitality, that made him both weapon and fragile vessel, vibrated in harmony with the rune's magic. He didn't cast a spell. He didn't need to. The curse did the work for him, reaching out like a living thing. Healing magic flowed from his palm, not the lethal reversal he usually produced, but pure, undiluted restoration. The kind of healing a normal healer would use to mend wounds and cure ailments. Into a rune designed to absorb healing magic. The effect was instantaneous. The dark rune flared to life, glowing not with blue light but with a brilliant, blinding white. The guardian froze, its hammer stopping mid-swing. Cracks of light spread from the rune, racing across its stone body like lightning across a stormy sky. The other runes, the blue glowing ones, flickered and died, their magic sucked into the overloaded core. For 3 heartbeats, the guardian stood perfectly still, a statue once more. Then it collapsed. The sound was like a mountain falling. Stone shattered against stone, the massive body breaking apart into chunks and rubble. Kazuki leaped clear at the last moment, landing in a roll that sent fresh waves of pain through his exhausted body. He came to rest against what remained of Lyra's alchemy table, breathing in great, ragged gasps. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the settling dust and the distant groan of the damaged monastery. Ilara approached cautiously, a fresh dagger in her hand, but the guardian was truly destroyed. Among the rubble, something glowed, a heart-shaped stone the size of a fist, pulsing with a soft, steady light. Lyra picked her way through the debris, her expression unreadable. She knelt beside the heartstone, her fingers tracing its smooth surface. The core, she murmured. Intact. Remarkable. What is it? Ilara asked, helping Kazuki to his feet. He leaned against her, his legs trembling with the aftermath of the potion's effects and his own exhaustion. A guardian's heartstone, Lyra said, holding it up to the light filtering through the broken ceiling. Rare beyond measure. With this, I can craft an amulet that might offer you some protection, not from physical harm, but from magical tracking. It could mask the brand of heresy, at least temporarily. Hope, fragile and dangerous, bloomed in Kazuki's chest. A way to hide from the church's relentless pursuit. A moment's respite from the constant fear of discovery. He opened his mouth to speak, to thank her, to ask how long it would take. He never got the chance. A shadow fell across the broken monastery wall, dark and sudden as an eclipse. Kazuki looked up, his enhanced perception catching the details even as his heart sank. Figures stood silhouetted against the morning sky, armored shapes on horseback, their plate mail gleaming in the sunlight. At their head rode a man in ornate silver armor, a relic held aloft in one hand that glowed with a sickly green light aimed directly at Kazuki. The Church Inquisitor from Viridia. He'd found them. The relic pulsed, and Kazuki felt the brand of heresy on his chest flare with agonizing heat, as if responding to a call only it could hear. The Inquisitor's voice carried across the ruined chamber, cold and certain as an executioner's blade. Heretic, he said, the word dripping with finality. Your dance ends here. The Inquisitor's voice cut through the monastery's shattered silence like a blade. Kazuki, branded heretic. You are a blight on creation, an anomaly that must be purged. His eyes, cold and unwavering behind the ornate helmet of the Church of Light, fixed on Kazuki's trembling form. Behind him, 6 elite paladins fanned out, their armor gleaming in the dim light filtering through broken stone walls. Each carried a weapon blessed with holy sigils that glowed with a soft, threatening light. Kazuki's breath came in ragged gasps. The brand of heresy on his shoulder burned with a constant, draining ache, sapping what little stamina remained after the battle with the Stone Guardian. His MP gauge hovered at 0, the emptiness a hollow void in his consciousness. Every muscle screamed with fatigue, the temporary agility potion Lyra had given him now a distant memory replaced by crushing exhaustion. He could feel the weight of his own fragility, the single point of health that separated him from oblivion. Ilara shifted beside him, her daggers already drawn. Her rogue's instincts had her assessing the room in a heartbeat, the broken altar to their left, the collapsed archway creating a bottleneck near the entrance, Lyra's alchemical workbench scattered with vials and powders behind them. 7 against 3, she muttered, her voice low. And one of us can't take a hit. Lyra, the elderly elf alchemist, moved with surprising grace, her hands already reaching for components on her belt. The relic, she whispered, her eyes narrowing at the ornate silver orb the Inquisitor held. It's amplifying the brand signal. They tracked us through it. The Inquisitor raised the relic. Light gathered within it, swirling like liquid gold. By the grace of the light, be cleansed. A beam of concentrated holy energy lanced toward Kazuki. Time seemed to slow. Kazuki's mind, honed by months of survival, screamed a single command, dodge. He had no MP4, ethereal dodge, but the skill's muscle memory remained. He threw himself sideways, the world phasing into a blur of gray as he tapped into the last dregs of his innate agility. The beam missed his chest by inches, but the edge of it clipped his left ankle as he landed. Pain exploded, not from injury, but from proximity. The holy energy tore through his worn leather boot like paper, searing the fabric and leaving the skin beneath red and raw. He staggered, catching himself against a fallen pillar. The smell of burnt leather filled his nostrils. Too close. One direct hit and it's over. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. Confined space, Elara hissed, already moving. She lunged at the nearest paladin, her daggers flashing as she aimed for the gaps in his plate armor. The clang of steel echoed through the monastery, sharp and discordant. Kazuki forced his breathing to steady. He couldn't afford panic. With a mental effort that felt like lifting a mountain, he activated Perception Overdrive. The skill cost MP he didn't have, but he pushed anyway, drawing on sheer willpower. The world sharpened. He could see the minute twitches in the Inquisitor's fingers as he prepared another spell, the shift in weight of the paladins as they advanced, the patterns of dust motes swirling in the air. His senses screamed with overload, but it gave him a fraction of a second's warning. The Inquisitor gestured, and two paladins broke from the group, charging Kazuki with maces raised. Kazuki danced back, his movements fueled by adrenaline and the lingering effects of his agility training. He weaved between their swings, each miss a breath of reprieve. But he was tiring fast. The brand stamina drain was a constant siphon, and the fatigue from earlier battles weighed him down like chains. Elara engaged three paladins, her movements a blur of evasion and precise strikes. She couldn't kill them, their armor was too thick, but she kept them occupied, using the rubble as cover. Lyra threw a vial that shattered at the Inquisitor's feet, releasing a cloud of acrid smoke. The Inquisitor coughed, his concentration broken momentarily. Kazuki saw his opening. He darted forward, his hand outstretched. Lethal touch, required no MP, it was the passive curse of his existence. His fingers brushed the Inquisitor's armored forearm. The effect was instantaneous. Holy steel blackened and cracked, as if touched by a forge's heart. The Inquisitor roared in pain, stumbling back as the armor disintegrated, revealing flesh that bubbled and charred beneath. But before Kazuki could press the advantage, the relic in the Inquisitor's other hand flared. A barrier of shimmering light erupted around the Inquisitor, throwing Kazuki back with a force that rattled his bones. Fool, the Inquisitor spat, clutching his wounded arm. The relic reflects healing magic. Your cursed touch is but a variant of it. You cannot harm me directly. Kazuki's mind raced. Reflects healing magic. But the relic itself isn't alive. He glanced at Lyra, who gave a barely perceptible nod. She understood. Lyra threw another vial, this one exploding into a blinding flash of light. In the momentary disorientation, Kazuki moved. He didn't aim for the Inquisitor, he aimed for the relic. His hand closed around a silver orb. There was no burst of lethal energy. Instead, the relic vibrated violently, the holy symbols on its surface glowing white-hot. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. Then, with a sound like shattering glass, it exploded. A wave of pure light erupted, throwing everyone in the room off their feet. Kazuki hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. For a moment, the world was silent, filled only with the ringing in his ears and the afterimage of the blast burned into his vision. He pushed himself up, his body protesting every movement. The Inquisitor lay stunned, his barrier gone. The paladins were similarly disoriented, struggling to rise. Elara was already on her feet, grabbing Kazuki's arm. Now, she shouted. Lyra led the way, darting through a side passage that hadn't fully collapsed. They stumbled out into the mountain air, the cold wind a shock after the claustrophobic heat of battle. Outside, 3 horses stood tethered, the paladins' mounts. Elara cut the ropes with a swift slash of her dagger. Kazuki hauled himself onto the nearest horse, his hands shaking. His MP gauge flickered, the desperate use of Perception Overdrive had drained him further, leaving him with maybe 5 MP, barely enough for a single, ethereal dodge. The fatigue was a physical weight, dragging at his limbs. He could feel the brands drain like a parasite feeding on his vitality. They rode hard, hooves pounding against the rocky path as they descended from the monastery's heights. The haunted mountains loomed around them, peaks shrouded in mist and shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Kazuki clung to the saddle, each jolt sending fresh waves of pain through his exhausted body. His thoughts were a chaotic whirl, the Inquisitor's words, Lyra's warning about his soul eroding, the constant, gnawing fear of a single misstep. Ilara rode beside him, her eyes scanning the terrain. "They'll regroup fast," she called over the wind. "We need distance." Lyra, surprisingly adept on horseback, pointed ahead. "There. The outpost of Garrick the Unyielding. He's a warrior of renown, if anyone can offer sanctuary, it's him." Kazuki squinted through the haze of his fatigue. In the distance, nestled in a valley between two jagged ridges, he saw a fortified structure of stone and timber. Walls rose high, punctuated by watchtowers. Hope, fragile and desperate, flickered in his chest. Then he saw the horde. Surrounding the outpost, like a tide of darkness, were demons. Dozens of them, twisted, monstrous forms with leathery wings, clawed hands, and eyes that burned with malevolent intelligence. They moved with an eerie coordination, pressing against the outpost's defenses. And as Kazuki watched, several of the demons turned their heads. Their eyes, glowing like embers, fixed not on the outpost, but on him. On the brand of heresy that pulsed like a beacon on his shoulder. A cold dread settled in Kazuki's stomach. The demons weren't just attacking the outpost, they were waiting. For him. The fireball exploded against the outpost wall with a deafening roar, sending shards of stone and splintered wood flying through the air. Kazuki threw himself behind a pile of rubble, the heat searing across his back like a branding iron. He gasped, every muscle screaming in protest as he landed hard on the ground, the impact jolting through his fragile frame. His vision swam with exhaustion, the brand of heresy on his chest pulsing with a dull, persistent ache that seemed to leach the very warmth from his bones. Around him, the outpost was chaos. Demons swarmed through the broken gates, twisted creatures with leathery wings, cloven hooves, and eyes that burned with malevolent intelligence. Their forms shifted in the flickering light of burning buildings, shadows dancing across scales and fur. Kazuki counted at least 20, maybe more, moving with unnatural coordination. They ignored the scattered defenders, their attention fixed squarely on him, drawn by the cursed mark that pulsed like a beacon in the darkness. "Ilara!" Kazuki shouted, his voice raw. He pushed himself up, his hands trembling as he scanned the carnage. She was already moving, daggers flashing as she engaged a pair of imps that had broken through the line. Her movements were fluid, precise, but even she was being pushed back by the sheer numbers. Lyra stood behind a crumbling stone column, her aged hands mixing alchemical powders that erupted in bursts of blinding light, momentarily disorienting the demons but doing little lasting damage. Kazuki's mind raced. His MP was at a pitiful 5 points, barely enough for a single use of perception overdrive. The fatigue from the monastery battle, the brand's constant drain, and the potion's aftereffects had reduced him to a trembling shell. Every breath felt like drawing glass into his lungs. But he had no choice. If he stayed still, he'd be torn apart. A demon with serrated claws lunged at him, its maw dripping acidic saliva. Kazuki didn't think, he moved. His body, trained through countless near-death encounters, reacted on instinct. He sidestepped, the claws missing his face by inches. The air whistled past his ear. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the demon's scaled arm. Lethal touch, activated, a surge of reversed healing magic flowing from his fingertips. The demon didn't scream, it simply froze, its form crumbling into black ash that scattered on the wind. The cost was minimal, just the innate energy of the touch, but each movement sapped his dwindling stamina. Another demon came, then another. Kazuki danced through them, a ghost in the chaos. He ducked under sweeping tails, leaped over low swipes, his movements growing increasingly desperate. His back burned where the fireball had scorched him, the pain a constant reminder of his mortality. 1 HP. A single scratch. He couldn't afford even the slightest mistake. But the demons were learning. They began to coordinate, herding him toward a corner of the courtyard where rubble blocked his escape routes. 3 of them advanced in unison, their eyes locked on him. Kazuki's heart hammered against his ribs. He had no MP left for ethereal dodge. No energy for fancy maneuvers. He was cornered. Then the ground shook. A massive figure barreled through the demon ranks, a tower shield slamming into the creatures with the force of a battering ram. Demons were thrown aside like rag dolls, bones crunching under the impact. The figure stood between Kazuki and the advancing horde, a mountain of muscle and steel, easily 7 feet tall, with armor that looked like it had been forged from the hull of a warship. A great sword was strapped to his back, but for now, he wielded only the shield, a wall of impenetrable defense. "Stay behind me," the warrior roared, his voice like grinding stones. He planted his feet, the shield forming an unbreakable barrier. Demons clawed at it, but their attacks glanced off the reinforced metal. "I am Garrick. This outpost is under my protection." Kazuki didn't hesitate. He pressed his back against Garrick's shield, feeling the solid warmth of the metal through his tattered clothes. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he wasn't alone in the front line. He could breathe, if only for a moment. "Elara, flank left." Kazuki shouted, his voice gaining strength. "Lyra, cover our rear with those flash powders." Elara nodded, vanishing into the shadows only to reappear behind a demon, her daggers finding gaps in its armor. Lyra threw another pouch, this one erupting in a cloud of choking smoke that blinded a cluster of imps. Garrick held the center, his shield movements economical, brutal. Every time a demon tried to circle around, he shifted, always keeping Kazuki protected. Kazuki moved with him, a deadly partner in this lethal dance. When a demon lunged at Garrick's exposed side, Kazuki was there, his hand grazing its leg. Ash. When another tried to leap over the shield, Kazuki touched its wing midair. More ash. He wasn't just evading now, he was attacking, using Garrick's defense as his platform. But the demons kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. "They're targeting you specifically," Garrick grunted, deflecting a fiery projectile with his shield. The impact made him stagger slightly, but he held firm. "That mark on your chest, it's drawing them like moths to a flame." "I know," Kazuki said, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "It's a curse. The church branded me." Garrick's eyes, visible through the slit in his helmet, narrowed. "A heretic? Interesting. Most heretics don't fight like this." He smashed a demon's skull with the edge of his shield. "What's your plan?" "We need to reach the demon lord," Kazuki said, touching another demon that got too close. It dissolved. "This curse, it's connected to him. I can kill him, but I need protection. I can't take a single hit." Garrick was silent for a moment, his shield never stopping its rhythmic defense. Then he nodded. "I've held this outpost for 3 years against demon raids. I've seen good men die because we lack the power to strike at the source. If you can end this, I'll be your shield." He glanced back at Kazuki, his gaze assessing. "But you're exhausted. You're shaking. You won't last another minute at this pace." Kazuki knew he was right. The fatigue was a physical weight, dragging at his limbs. The brand's drain was a constant siphon, leaving him hollow. But he had an idea, a desperate, untested one. His healing magic was lethal to enemies, but what about allies? The skill description had never specified. In the monastery, he'd used pure healing on the Guardian, not the reversed version. Could he control the polarity? As Garrick blocked another assault, Kazuki placed his hand on the warrior's armored back. He focused, not on reversing the healing, but on channeling it as it was meant to be, a flow of restorative energy. He had no MP to spend, but, paradox vitality, didn't require MP for its basic function, only for the active skills. This was just the raw magic, directed not with lethal intent, but with purpose. A warm, golden light emanated from Kazuki's hand, seeping into Garrick's armor. The warrior stiffened, then let out a low grunt of surprise. "My endurance, it's bolstered. The fatigue from holding this shield, it's fading." He tested his grip, the shield seeming lighter in his hands. "How?" "It's harmless on allies," Kazuki said, a faint smile touching his lips despite the pain. "Just don't let me touch you when I'm trying to kill something." Garrick laughed, a deep, booming sound that cut through the chaos. "Then let's clear this filth and talk properly." With renewed vigor, Garrick pushed forward, his shield becoming an offensive weapon. He bashed, slammed, and crushed demons underfoot. Kazuki moved alongside him, a shadow of death, his touches leaving nothing but ash in their wake. Elara picked off stragglers, her daggers finding throats and eyes. Lyra provided support, her alchemy creating barriers of shimmering light that slowed the demons' advance. It took another 20 minutes of brutal, relentless combat. Kazuki lost count of how many demons he'd turned to ash. His back burned, his muscles screamed, and his vision blurred at the edges. But Garrick was an immovable rock, and together, they carved a path through the horde. When the last demon fell, dissolving into black mist, the courtyard fell silent except for the crackle of distant fires. Kazuki slumped against a broken wall, his legs giving out. Elara was at his side in an instant, checking him for injuries. "You're scorched, but no breaks in the skin," she said, her voice tight with concern. "That was too close, Kazuki." "I'm fine," he whispered, though he was anything but. His stamina was critically low, his MP still at 5, and the brand pulsed with a renewed intensity, as if angered by the demon's defeat. Garrick removed his helmet, revealing a face carved from granite, broad features, a thick beard streaked with grey, and eyes that held the weight of countless battles. He looked at Kazuki, then at Elara and Lyra. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But you're in no shape to face the demon lord." Lyra approached, her hands cradling the heartstone from the guardian. It glowed with a soft, inner light. "This may help, though the cost is high." She placed the stone on the ground and began to work, her fingers moving with practiced precision. She mixed powders from her belt, chanting under her breath in an ancient elvish tongue. The air around them grew cold, and the heartstone pulsed in time with Kazuki's brand. After several minutes, Lyra held up an amulet, a simple silver chain with the heartstone set in a claw-like clasp. "This will absorb one minor impact," she said, her voice grave. "A glancing blow, a stray arrow, a weak spell. It will shatter, and you will be unharmed. But..." She met Kazuki's eyes. "It draws on your life force to activate. Each use will drain years from your lifespan. I cannot say how many, the curse makes it unpredictable." Kazuki took the amulet. It was warm, almost alive in his hand. He could feel a connection to it, a thread of energy that linked to the brand. He put it on, the stone resting against his chest beside the cursed mark. A faint shimmer enveloped him for a moment, then faded. "It's better than nothing," he said quietly. "Thank you, Lyra." Garrick watched, his expression unreadable. "A shield that costs your life. You're determined to see this through, aren't you?" "What choice do I have?" Kazuki said, pushing himself to his feet. Every movement was agony, but he stood tall. "The church hunts me. The demons hunt me. This curse is eating my soul. The only way out is through the demon lord." Garrick nodded slowly. "Then I'll join you. My sword and shield are yours. But we need to move quickly. This attack wasn't random, it was a probing force. The main army won't be far behind." As if on cue, a scout came sprinting into the courtyard, his armor dented, his face pale. "Garrick. News from the eastern watchtower." He skidded to a halt, his eyes widening at the sight of the demon ashes littering the ground. "The demon lord's army, it's on the move. Thousands strong. They're marching toward the Black Plains, and..." He pointed a trembling finger at Kazuki. "His mark. It's glowing brighter. The scouts say it's pulling the army toward him. They're coming here." Kazuki looked down. The brand of heresy was no longer just pulsing, it was shining with a fierce, crimson light, visible even through his clothes. It felt hot, almost burning, and a strange tugging sensation emanated from it, like a compass needle pointing true north. Toward the Black Plains. Toward the final battlefield. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the amulet against his chest, the exhaustion in his bones, the fragile thread of his single HP. Around him, his new party stood ready, Elara with her daggers, Lyra with her alchemy, Garrick with his unbreakable shield. They were his protection, his chance. But the cost was written in the amulet's warmth and the brand's relentless glow. The dance of doom was entering its final act, and the stage was set with fire, shadow, and the desperate hope of a glass cannon healer who had to survive just one more hit. The Black Plains stretched before them like a canvas of death. Kazuki's breath came in ragged gasps as he surveyed the nightmare landscape, a vast, cracked expanse of obsidian soil where nothing grew but twisted shadows. The sky above churned with unnatural storms, purple lightning arcing between clouds the color of bruises. And at the center of it all, the demon lord waited. He was not what Kazuki had imagined. Not some horned beast or armored warlord, but something far more terrible, a towering entity of shifting shadow and flickering blue flame, standing thrice the height of Garrick's broad-shouldered frame. Its form seemed to ripple between solidity and smoke, with eyes like burning coals that fixed immediately on Kazuki's chest, where the brand of heresy glowed with painful intensity. Around it, legions of monsters seethed, hulking brutes with stone-like skin, winged creatures that circled like vultures, and crawling things that left trails of acidic slime across the dark earth. "It's drawn to the brand," Lyra whispered, her elderly elf hands trembling as she clutched her alchemical satchel. Like a beacon. Ilara nocked an arrow, her rogue's eyes scanning the battlefield. "We need to get you close, Kazuki. One touch. That's all." Garrick hefted his massive tower shield, the metal scarred from countless battles. "I'll clear a path. Stay behind me, healer. One scratch and you're gone." Kazuki nodded, his throat too dry for words. His body screamed with exhaustion, every muscle burned from the fatigued debuff that had plagued him since the monastery. His MP sat at a pitiful 5 out of 50, and his stamina felt like a frayed rope about to snap. Only the heartstone amulet around his neck offered any comfort, its polished surface warm against his skin. Lyra had warned him, it could absorb one minor hit, but the cost would be a chunk of his lifespan. How much? She hadn't known. Just that every use would age him, weaken his already fragile body. The demon lord moved first. It didn't stride forward like a living thing. It flowed, shadows coalescing and dispersing as it raised a clawed hand. The air grew cold, then hot, then cold again, a sickening cycle that made Kazuki's head spin. Then the wave came, a ripple of dark energy that tore across the plain, turning the obsidian soil to glass where it passed. Monsters scattered or were consumed, their forms dissolving into the wave's advancing edge. "Now!" Garrick roared, planting his shield. Kazuki didn't think. He activated Ethereal Dodge, the skill burning through his last 15 MP in a single, desperate surge. The world blurred around him, colors bleeding together as he phased partially out of reality. He felt the dark energy pass through him, not around, but through, as if he were a ghost looking at the living world from just beyond the veil. It was cold. So cold it burned. Then he was back, stumbling as the skill ended, his MP dropping to 0 with a finality that felt like a door slamming shut. He gasped, the effort leaving him lightheaded. No more magic. No more lethal touch, unless he could somehow regain MP in the middle of this hellscape. Forward. Ilara's arrow flew, striking a winged creature that had broken from the ranks. It shrieked and fell, but 3 more took its place. Garrick charged, his shield deflecting claws and fangs as he carved a path through the monster horde. Lyra threw vials that exploded in clouds of choking gas or bursts of freezing mist, slowing the advance. Kazuki followed, his agility boost, passive kicking in, his movements became fluid, precise, every step calculated to avoid the chaos around him. He ducked under a swinging tail, sidestepped a spray of acid, leaped over a crawling thing that snapped at his ankles. Each motion cost stamina he didn't have. Each near miss sent his heart hammering against his ribs. He activated Perception Overdrive, the skill draining what little mental focus he had left. The world sharpened, he could see individual motes of dust in the air, track the trajectory of every projectile, anticipate attacks before they came. A brute swung a stone fist, Kazuki saw the muscle tension in its shoulder a fraction of a second before the movement, and he twisted aside. A spellcaster among the monsters began weaving fire, Kazuki noted the gathering heat in its palms and changed direction, putting Garrick's bulk between himself and the coming blast. But perception came at a cost. His headache intensified, a throbbing pain behind his eyes that made the glowing brand on his chest feel like a brandished iron. The constant drain from the curse was there too, a subtle sapping of vitality that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. They were getting closer. The demon lord watched them approach, its burning eyes never leaving Kazuki. It didn't seem concerned. It raised both hands this time, and the sky answered. Dozens of dark projectiles rained down, each one trailing shadows and humming with malevolent energy. Incoming! Ilara shouted, firing arrow after arrow to intercept what she could. Garrick raised his shield, but the projectiles came from all angles. One clipped Kazuki's shoulder, not a direct hit, but a glancing blow that should have been nothing. Except he was at 1 HP. Any contact meant death. The Heartstone amulet flared. A warm, golden light enveloped him for an instant, and the projectile dissipated harmlessly. But the warmth turned to ice in his veins. He felt it, a sudden, profound weariness that sank into his bones. His vision blurred for a moment, and when it cleared, he noticed new lines on the back of his hand, subtle wrinkles that hadn't been there seconds before. The amulet's surface now bore a hairline crack. Lyra had been right. It had saved him, but at a price. How many years had that cost him? 10. 20. He didn't know. Only that he felt older, more fragile than ever. Kazuki. Ilara's voice cut through his thoughts. Keep moving. He pushed forward, his body protesting every step. The demon lord was only 50 yards away now, 30, 20. Garrick engaged the remaining monsters, his shield ringing with impacts as he held the line. Lyra threw her last vials, creating barriers of ice and walls of thorny vines. Ilara provided covering fire, her arrows finding eyes and joints with deadly precision. Then Kazuki was there, standing before the entity of shadow and flame. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Heat radiated from it in waves, yet the shadows around it were cold enough to make his breath fog. Its core, a pulsating sphere of dark energy at its center, glowed with the same malevolent light as the brand on his chest. The demon lord looked down at him, and for a moment, Kazuki thought he saw something like curiosity in those burning eyes. Then it attacked. Not with magic this time, but with physical force, a sweep of a clawed hand that moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. Kazuki dove, rolling beneath the blow, feeling the air tear above him. He came up running, circling, looking for an opening. The demon lord tracked him, its movements fluid and unpredictable. Spells erupted from its form, bolts of shadow, waves of force, tendrils of grasping darkness. Kazuki danced through them all, his agility boost, and perception overdrive, working in tandem to keep him one step ahead of death. But his stamina was failing. Each dodge came slower. Each breath burned in his lungs. The fatigued debuff was a weight dragging him down, and the lifespan drain from the amulet had left him feeling hollow, empty. He saw his chance. The demon lord raised both arms to unleash another wave of energy, leaving its core exposed for a fraction of a second. Kazuki didn't hesitate. He charged forward, leaping over a trailing shadow, ducking under a sweeping claw, and reached out with his hand. He had no MP left for lethal touch. But the skill didn't require MP to be active, it was always there, a part of him, waiting to be channeled. He focused everything he had left, his will, his fear, his desperate hope, into that single point of contact. His fingers brushed the pulsating core. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the reversed healing magic surged from him, a torrent of lethal energy that should have mended but instead unmade. White light, pure, blinding, and utterly wrong, erupted from the point of contact. The demon lord convulsed, its shadowy form rippling as the light spread through it like cracks in glass. A sound emerged from it, not a roar but a high, keening wail that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. The entity began to disintegrate. Flakes of shadow peeled away, dissolving into nothingness. The blue flames guttered and died. The burning eyes dimmed, then went dark. The towering form shuddered, collapsed in on itself, and started to crumble. But the backlash hit Kazuki like a physical blow. A wave of force threw him backward, sending him tumbling across the obsidian ground. He skidded to a stop, his body screaming in protest, every inch of him bruised and battered. He tried to push himself up, but his arms gave way. He lay there, gasping, watching as the demon lord's remains dissolved into swirling ash. Then he saw it. A shard of dark magic, a final, fragmented piece of the entity's power, had broken free during the disintegration. It spun through the air, sharp and deadly, trailing shadows. And it was flying straight toward his heart. Time seemed to slow. Kazuki watched the shard approach, inches away now, its jagged edges gleaming in the stormlight. He could see every detail, the way it rotated slowly, the dark energy coiling around it, the precise trajectory that would drive it through his chest. He had no strength left to move. No amulet to save him. No MP4, ethereal dodge. This was it. After everything, the running, the fighting, the desperate dance through death's embrace, it would end here, on this desolate plain, with victory in his grasp but his life slipping away. He wondered if Ilara would reach him in time. If Garrick's shield could intercept it. If Lyra had one last trick in her bag. The shard hung in the air before him, a frozen moment of impending doom. Kazuki's breath caught. His heart beat once, twice. And in that split second, he didn't know if this was the end, or if his party could save him.